Beneath the endless sky, a single raven carried the weight of divine knowledge, its wings heavy with secrets of creation and destruction. As the world teetered on the edge of collapse, it was the raven who would decide whether humanity would rise or fall into the shadows of its past. In the beginning, before the veil of time was drawn and the earth took form, there existed a world where divine forces intertwined effortlessly with the natural realm. The air shimmered with a quiet hum, an unspoken bond between the celestial and the earthly. In this space, where light and shadow danced together, animals roamed not simply as creatures of instinct, but as messengers of higher purpose. Each one, from the smallest insect to the largest beast, held a unique role in the grand tapestry of creation, guided by forces beyond their comprehension. But among them, one stood apart: the raven. The raven was not merely a bird, nor just another creature drawn from the soil and sky. It was something far more ancient, a being clothed in darkness, but chosen by the divine to carry out a task of great consequence. To the untrained eye, it appeared as an ordinary creature, its sleek black feathers reflecting the twilight glow, its eyes gleaming with a depth of knowing that most could not fathom. Yet, within the raven stirred a knowledge, a calling that transcended its earthly form. It was a being from the celestial realms, one of those who walked the line between the physical and the divine, and in its wings fluttered the burden of a divine mission, known only to the highest. The world, though beautiful, was not without its discord. Even before the first breath of humanity stirred the dust, there was an unspoken conflict, a tension between creation's perfection and the forces that sought to disrupt it. The raven, a silent witness to this cosmic dance, had been chosen to carry a message, not one of immediate understanding, but one that would unravel over the course of time. It would be a message of balance, of harmony between the known and the unknown, the seen and the unseen. But this task was not to be undertaken lightly, nor would it be a simple flight. As the divine forces looked upon the world, they saw a delicate balance that required careful tending. The raven, imbued with the essence of both light and shadow, was chosen to act as the emissary between realms, the bridge between what was and what would be. It was not through its wings alone that it would carry this task, but through its ability to traverse the unseen realms, to observe, and to deliver the message at the right time when the world was ready to hear it. In the quiet before the dawn of humanity, the raven felt the weight of its mission settle deep within. It was no ordinary bird, it was a chosen vessel, crafted by divine hands to walk in both worlds. Its journey had begun long before the first humans would step foot on the earth, and yet its role, as mysterious as the universe itself, would unfold in ways both tragic and profound. But the raven was ready. Its wings, though burdened, were swift. The journey had begun. As the first light of dawn stretched across the horizon, the raven perched silently atop a jagged rock, its dark wings folded in stillness. The world below was still a canvas of quiet potential, bathed in the soft golden hue of the rising sun. The air, once thick with the heavy silence of a nascent world, now began to breathe with life. In that moment, the raven felt the pulse of creation, a rhythm that spoke of beginnings, of life stretching out into the vastness of the earth. The divine forces had woven the threads of existence carefully, layer by layer, until the moment of creation had arrived. From the depths of the earth to the vast sky above, life began to unfurl like the petals of a flower, each new breath and movement echoing in harmony with the world's design. The rivers ran clear, the mountains rose with majestic grace, and the oceans shimmered as if they held the secrets of the universe within them. The first rays of the sun kissed the earth, awakening the slumbering soil, coaxing the seeds of plants to sprout and the creatures of the earth to stir. The raven watched with solemn eyes, its black feathers absorbing the light and the shadow alike. It was not a passive observer, but one who understood the profound delicacy of this new world. It could feel the pulse of life stirring below, a force of creation at once delicate and powerful, a force that balanced on the knife's edge between order and chaos. The animals emerged from the earth's embrace, wandering with wonder, unaware of the intricate balance that held their world together. The trees reached upward, their branches stretching toward the heavens, while the flowers bloomed in quiet reverence, their petals soft and full of promise. Yet, as the world unfolded, the raven knew that this balance would not be easily maintained. There was a subtle tension woven into the fabric of existence, a thin thread that connected creation to destruction. Life, in all its beauty, came with its own contradictions. Each new birth was a promise of growth, but it was also a reminder of the eventual decay that would follow. The raven, knowing the deeper laws of the universe, understood that creation was not a static thing. It was a constant interplay between the forces of order and chaos, a dance that required careful attention and, at times, intervention. The raven's wings twitched as it considered this balance. It was a keeper of the unseen, a witness to the delicate threads that held everything together. It had not yet spoken, for the world had not yet asked for its counsel. But the raven knew that it would not be long before the forces of chaos began to stir, and it would be called upon to play its part in the great unfolding of creation. The morning had arrived, and with it, a new world. But the raven, ever watchful, understood that the story of creation was only just beginning. The heavens were still, as if holding their breath, when the decree from the divine whispered through the ether. The sky stretched far beyond the raven's knowing, vast and untouchable. Yet within that boundless expanse, there was a voice that spoke, not in thunder or flame, but in the quiet certainty of eternal wisdom. It was a voice that did not need to be heard to be understood, for it reverberated within the fabric of all that was an unspoken truth that resided at the core of the universe. The raven, perched in its solemn silence, felt the weight of the moment without understanding its full meaning. The birds of the earth, the creatures that roamed the ground, and the winds that whispered through the trees, had yet to learn their part in the grand design. But the raven, with its sharp eyes and keen senses, knew that something was about to unfold. It had seen the beauty of creation, the pulse of life that throbbed through every leaf and branch. Yet the raven had also glimpsed something more, a shadow in the corners of its vision, a pull toward something greater than the simple life it had known. In the quiet stillness, the voice spoke directly to the raven. It was not a call of grandeur or glory, nor a summons filled with praise. It was a quiet command, an invitation to play a role in a story much larger than any one creature could understand. You, humble one, are chosen, the voice said, its resonance both soft and commanding. You will carry a message that the world cannot yet hear. You will be the harbinger of what is yet to come. The raven's wings shuddered with an ancient knowing. It was not the strength of the lion or the grace of the eagle that would carry the message, but the quiet, unassuming presence of a creature that seemed almost forgotten in the tapestry of creation. The raven understood that its significance was not in its appearance or its strength, but in its ability to travel unseen, to carry words without question, to remain hidden until the moment of revelation. The divine rationale was clear. The raven was neither the most obvious nor the most powerful of creatures. Yet therein lay its power. The world would not anticipate the arrival of a message delivered by such a seemingly insignificant being, and in that, the raven would carry a truth that would ripple across time, altering the course of the world in ways that could not yet be foreseen. It was not the raven's role to question or challenge the decree. Its wings would carry it across the expanse of creation, carrying with it a message that would unlock secrets long hidden and perhaps open doors that mankind was not yet ready to comprehend. The raven had been chosen for its quiet strength, its humility, and its ability to witness the great mysteries without revealing too much. The world would know its presence, but not its purpose, at least, not yet. And so the raven, with its wings stretched wide, prepared for the journey that was not its own, yet belonged to it completely. In the depths of the eternal expanse, where light and darkness had yet to fully define themselves, the celestial beings gathered in a circle of quiet deliberation. Their voices did not echo, for they spoke in thoughts, in the purest form of understanding, an understanding that transcended time and space. The creation was young, fragile in its unfolding, and though the divine forces had brought it into being, there was a stirring unease that hung in the air, like the first tremors before the dawn of a storm. The celestial beings, radiant in their forms, stood as guardians of the newly birthed world. They had watched as the first rays of creation had blossomed from the formless void, as the stars had found their places in the heavens and the earth had been shaped from the darkness. Yet now, with the world in its infancy, the question was not whether creation would endure, but whether it could survive the trials that lay ahead. For creation, beautiful and perfect as it was, carried within it the seeds of its own challenge, the potential for disorder, for imbalance, for a turning away from the divine path. The celestial beings spoke of this with solemn faces, their voices woven into the fabric of the cosmos itself. The world is young, but it is not yet free from trial. One of them said, its voice like a ripple through a still pond. It will face the tempests of discord, the shadows of doubt, and the breaking of harmony. There is more than beauty here. There is also the test of strength. Another celestial being, whose essence radiated with a light softer than the first, responded with quiet contemplation. And the raven? It asked, its question hanging in the ether like a thread connecting the realms of light and darkness. What role will it play in this unfolding? What part will it take in the world's trial? The others paused, their awareness extending into the future, seeing the path not as it was, but as it might become. The raven, chosen by the divine forces, was not meant to be a figure of grandeur, but of quiet wisdom. The raven, with its dark wings and piercing gaze, would carry the message that creation itself could not escape the forces that sought to disrupt it. It was not the strongest among the creatures, nor the most beautiful, but it held within its simple form a harbinger of what was to come, a reminder that the world, despite its beauty, would not remain untouched by the storm of challenge that lay ahead. The raven shall watch and wait, one celestial being said. It shall not act until the moment is ripe, but in its stillness, it will carry the truth of what must be. It will bear witness to the fall and the rise, to the destruction and the renewal. And so, in the quiet gathering of the celestial beings, they understood creation was never meant to be without challenge. The raven would be the first to witness the breaking of the world, but it would also be the first to carry the promise of its restoration. In its flight, the raven would carry both the weight of creation's trials and the hope of its ultimate redemption. The raven perched quietly upon a branch, its glossy feathers catching the faint light of a sky still caught between night and day. Its mind buzzed with questions, the weight of its newly revealed task pressing upon it like the first drops of a storm. It had always been a creature of the earth, of the sky, free to soar without purpose, to glide in the winds without thought of consequence. But now, it felt the stirrings of something far greater than itself, something ancient and profound, something that ran deeper than its instinctive flight. It was chosen. Though the raven had once reveled in its freedom, the divine voice, though gentle, had been insistent. It had not asked the raven to bear this burden. It had given the raven no choice but to accept it. Now, in the quiet morning, Alone in the stillness of creation's early days, it began to understand the gravity of what it had been entrusted with. The world, so fresh and full of life, carried an undercurrent of darkness, an impending storm of imbalance, a deep well of corruption that could twist its beauty into chaos. The raven's wings fluttered restlessly, the weight of divine knowledge heavy upon its chest. It would carry this knowledge, not out of strength or grandeur, but as a silent witness to what was to come. The world, once perfect and unmarred, was destined to fall. It was a truth that weighed on its heart, and yet it could not look away. The raven, in all its simplicity, was called to be both messenger and observer, a creature whose very existence would mark the point where light and shadow met. In the silence, the raven thought of the world it had been born into, lush, vibrant, a delicate balance between creation and destruction. It had seen the first rays of light, the first breaths of life. It had heard the wind sing and the trees whisper. But it had also sensed the tremors beneath the surface, the restlessness of creatures that did not yet know their place in the order of things. The raven knew, deep down, that the task set before it would be a lonely one. It would not be a hero in the way that legends spoke of heroes. It would not strike down evil with a sword or lead armies into battle. Its role was far subtler, far more insidious. The raven was to carry the message, to bear the weight of truth that no one else could. It was a messenger of warning and hope, of judgment and redemption. It would fly above the corruption that spread like a dark cloud across the world, a silent herald of both despair and salvation. But even as it began to understand the scope of its mission, the raven couldn't shake the feeling of reluctance that lingered in its heart. This knowledge, this responsibility, it was more than it had ever dreamed of, and far more than it had ever wanted. But the raven understood that, despite its doubts, it was chosen for a reason, and in that understanding, it took its first flight into the unknown, knowing that it would carry the world's fate on its wings. The first humans emerged like the soft glow of dawn, fragile and unformed, yet imbued with the spark of something far greater than the earth around them. The raven watched from the shadows of the trees, its sharp eyes tracing their every movement as they stumbled and fumbled their way through the fresh world. The air, so rich and vibrant, seemed to welcome them, the earth beneath their feet yielding to their touch. They were beautiful in their simplicity, creatures born of dust and divine breath, innocent and unaware of the burden they would one day carry. The raven observed them with an ever-deepening sense of quiet concern. In their eyes, it saw both potential and peril, a delicate balance teetering on the edge of a precipice. They were creatures of both flesh and spirit, designed for greatness, but, as yet, unaware of the weight of that calling. Their hands, so small, clutched at the world, pulling it toward them, shaping it as they learned. The first steps they took were uncertain, their voices tentative, echoing in the vast emptiness around them. But already, the raven could see the glimmers of something darker, a hunger within them not unlike the ravenous void it had sensed in the world. The humans moved together, and the raven flew overhead, tracing their every step from the heights. It saw them struggle to communicate, to build, to understand the world around them. There was an inherent goodness in them. This was not lost on the raven, but there was also a shadow growing beneath the surface, a tension between the gift of creation and the instinct for destruction. They were learning, yes, but they were also unknowing. Their curiosity, so innocent at first, was becoming a hunger to consume, to possess, to understand without knowing the cost of their understanding. They sought the world with open eyes but did not yet see the consequences of what their touch would bring. The raven had been created for a purpose, and now it understood that purpose more deeply. It had watched the first light break over the horizon, the first breaths of life fill the lungs of creation, and now it was witnessing the birth of a new kind of life, one capable of great love and boundless potential. but also capable of profound mistakes. The raven felt its wings twitch, its heart heavy with the knowledge of what lay ahead for the humans. They would stumble, they would fall, and yet they would rise again. In their innocence, they would shape the world in ways that no other creatures could, and in their blindness, they would bring about their own undoing. The raven did not speak to them. It did not intervene. It only watched, as it had been tasked to do, knowing that the road ahead would be long and fraught with darkness. It was no comfort to see the potential within them, because it was clear, even now, that the world of humans would be one of great trial, one that would stretch far beyond the first steps they took. The first cracks in the human heart were small, almost imperceptible. They began as whispers, like the soft rustling of leaves in the wind, unnoticed at first. The raven saw them all. It had perched in the shadows of the great trees, its wings still, its eyes scanning the world below with a quiet intensity. The humans, so young, so full of promise, began to shift in ways that troubled the raven's soul. Their innocence, once a shield against the darker elements of the world, began to fade, and with it, the purity of their hearts. It started with a simple curiosity, a desire to know more, to understand the things they did not yet comprehend. But as the days stretched into weeks, and the weeks into months, that curiosity turned into something else. They sought power. The very essence of creation, with all its beauty and mystery, became something to be controlled, bent to their will. It was not enough for them to simply live in harmony with the world. They wanted to rule it, to master it. This hunger for dominion crept into their souls like an insidious shadow, taking root where the light of innocence once had been. The raven watched as they began to take more than they needed. They discovered fire, and it was beautiful, but it quickly became a tool of destruction. The earth trembled beneath their hands as they carved into its depths, extracting its secrets without understanding the cost. And when the first of them turned from the path of wisdom, choosing instead the lure of power, the raven knew something had been lost. It was no longer just curiosity that drove them. It was greed. In the depths of their hearts, the raven saw the seed of sin sprouting slowly, like a dark vine twisting its way through the fertile soil of their souls. And once the seed had taken root, it began to grow, pushing against the walls of their hearts, demanding more. The raven could not intervene, not yet. It could only watch as the humans, once so pure, began to wander further from the light. Their eyes, once full of wonder, now glimmered with something else, something darker. The raven felt a stirring deep within itself, a sense of purpose growing clearer by the day. It had been chosen for this. It had been tasked with witnessing this very moment, the moment when innocence was lost and humanity's first step toward corruption was taken. The raven understood now, perhaps more than it ever had before, that its role was not simply to observe, but to carry the weight of this knowledge. It would be the bearer of the truth, the one who would carry the message of both creation and destruction, of beauty and sin. It was not a message of hope. Not yet. Not for the humans. Not in this moment. But there was a greater purpose in store, a reason for all of this. And the raven, now more than ever, understood the weight of its wings. The raven stood at the edge of a great precipice, its dark wings unfurled in the golden light of dawn. It had been summoned. It had known this moment would come. Yet there was still a hesitation in the pit of its chest, a weight it could not shake. The wind whipped around it, urging it forward, but the raven paused. It had watched for so long, in the shadows and in silence, as the world began to shift in subtle, disturbing ways. The humans had taken their first steps into darkness, and now it was its turn to act. With a single, resolute movement, the raven launched itself into the air. The sky stretched out before it, vast and endless. Yet the weight of its mission pressed down on its wings like stone. It was not just a flight. It was a journey that would mark the beginning of something both painful and inevitable. The raven had never known the full depth of its responsibility until now. It had been a mere witness, a passive observer, but now it was something more, an instrument of the divine, a bearer of a message that would ripple across the world and change everything. As the raven soared, it felt the currents of the wind beneath its wings, pulling it higher, farther from the world it knew. The earth below became a distant memory, a blur of colors and shapes that seemed to lose their meaning with every passing moment. And yet, despite the beauty of the world below, there was a gnawing feeling deep inside the raven's chest, a sense of urgency, a call that could not be ignored. It was not the beauty of creation that now captivated it. It was the message it had been tasked to deliver, a message that weighed heavily on its soul. The journey was long. The air grew colder and the winds more forceful, as though the very sky itself sought to challenge the raven's resolve. Its wings began to ache, its body tired from the unrelenting flight, but there could be no turning back. It had been chosen, and the message it carried could not be left unspoken. The raven's heart, once light and free, now beat with the weight of purpose. At times it faltered, unsure if it could continue. The distance between it and the earth felt endless, and in its weariness, the raven began to question the task set before it. Was it truly the right one for this responsibility? It had only ever been an observer. How could it bear the burden of such knowledge, such power? Yet, with every beat of its wings, the raven understood that the answer was not one it could find alone. The path was the only way forward, and the message, no matter how heavy, must be delivered. As it continued its flight, the raven's thoughts turned inward. This journey was not just about the message, it was about the transformation of the raven itself. It was becoming something more than it had ever been, something capable of carrying the weight of both creation and destruction. The heavens trembled as the watchers descended. Their wings, once woven from the light of the cosmos, now fluttered with the weight of rebellion. The stars dimmed as their divine radiance dimmed, casting shadows across the earth below. The raven, perched high on a craggy cliff, watched with an unsettling stillness. It had long sensed that this day would come, the moment when the boundary between the celestial and the earthly would be torn asunder. But nothing could have prepared it for the sight of such defiance, such fall from grace. The Watchers, once entrusted with the guardianship of creation, had cast aside their divine mandate in pursuit of something darker. They had abandoned their celestial posts and set their eyes upon the human world below, drawn by a desire not just to observe, but to possess. Their descent was not just an act of disobedience, it was a rupture, a cosmic wound that threatened to undo the order of the heavens themselves. The raven's heart beat heavier with every passing moment, the weight of the celestial conflict pressing down upon it. As the Watchers touched down upon the earth, their presence rippled through creation like a stone thrown into still waters. The earth groaned beneath their weight, the sky itself seeming to waver with the force of their arrival. They were beings of immense power, radiating a force so pure, so overwhelming, that the very air seemed to tremble in their presence. But now, instead of spreading light, they brought shadows. The raven's feathers bristled as it felt the shift, the tension between the celestial beings and the earth, the clash between divine order and earthly chaos. For the raven, the sight was both a warning and a revelation. It had known its role would not be simple, but now it realized the true scope of its purpose. The Watcher's descent was not just a moment of celestial rebellion, it was the beginning of a profound shift, one that would affect both heaven and earth in ways it could scarcely understand. The raven had thought itself merely a messenger, a bearer of divine knowledge, but now it felt as though it were standing at the very heart of the conflict between good and evil, light and dark, order and chaos. The raven spread its wings, a wave of uncertainty passing through it. The path ahead was no longer clear, and the weight of the message it carried grew heavier with each beat of its heart. It had not been chosen merely to bear a message, it was a part of a greater, unfolding narrative. The Watchers, in their rebellion, had set into motion a chain of events that could not be undone, and the Raven now understood that its task was not just to deliver a message, but to witness and, in some way, to participate in the divine resolution. It knew, too, that this was not just the Watchers' fall. It was the beginning of something far more complex, something that would ripple through the world and beyond, altering the course of creation forever. The Raven felt the weight of its responsibility more acutely than ever. Its flight had only just begun, and the journey would lead it into places it had never before imagined. The task ahead was not simply about bearing knowledge, it was about bearing witness to the transformation of the world itself. The skies darkened as the first drops of the impending flood fell from the heavens, each one a harbinger of the cleansing waters that would soon sweep across the earth. The Raven watched, perched in silence, as the world began to tremble under the weight of divine judgment. It had known that this day would come, the day when the earth would be washed clean, but now that it had arrived, the enormity of the task ahead pressed down upon the Raven's wings. It was no longer merely a messenger, no longer just a witness to the divine unfolding. Now, it was part of the very fabric of salvation. God had chosen the Raven for this moment, to carry a message of hope amidst the overwhelming destruction. Its mission was clear, though the weight of it felt immense. The Ark, that vessel of life, was to be guided through the chaos, the swirling waters, to the safety of a new beginning. The Raven understood the gravity of the task. It was more than a message now. It was the path of survival for the future of creation. As the floodwaters began to rise, engulfing the earth and submerging the lands in darkness, the Raven took flight, its wings cutting through the air with urgency. Below, Noah's Ark floated on the swelling tide, a solitary island amidst the rising seas. Inside, Noah and his family huddled together, awaiting the resolution of a world that had gone wrong. The animals on board, each one an echo of the original harmony, shifted restlessly, unaware of the greater cosmic struggle unfolding beyond the confines of their sanctuary. The Raven, circling above the Ark, could feel the stirring of something ancient within it, something far beyond the confines of its own understanding. It had been given dominion over the flight of salvation, the task of guiding this fragile vessel through the storm that raged across the earth. The Raven knew the world would be reborn from the waters, but it also understood that the path to this rebirth would be fraught with peril. Each wave that lapped against the Ark was a reminder of the destruction that had come before, and the Raven could not help but feel the weight of the lives it carried on its wings. With every beat of its wings, the Raven called to the Ark, guiding it with a precision that belied the chaos around it. The Ark seemed to float upon the very winds of the Raven's flight, each gust of wind carrying the promise of safety. The Raven had become both a guide and a protector, its wings tracing a path through the storm, a path that would lead to a new beginning, to a world that had been cleansed and renewed. The floodwaters continued to rise, but in the Raven's heart burned the certainty of one truth: the world was not lost. It was only changing, transforming, as all things must, through the waters of renewal. The Raven would carry its message, as it had been entrusted to do. It was no longer just a messenger, it was a part of the salvation itself. A bridge between the old world and the new. A harbinger of the future yet to be. As the Ark drifted on the turbulent waters, the Raven found itself caught in an ever-deepening struggle within. The task before it had always been clear: to guide, to protect, to deliver God's will. But as the days turned into weeks, and the floodwaters continued to rise, the Raven began to feel the weight of its own doubts. It had always known its role as a messenger, but now, with Noah's life and the future of creation resting upon its wings, the true depth of its mission became painfully apparent. Noah, a man of faith but not of extraordinary power, was an unlikely vessel for the world's salvation. He was just a man, a human, frail and mortal. The raven had seen divine beauty in all things, in the design of the heavens, in the creatures of the earth, and in the intricate balance of life. But here, before Noah, it felt the uncertainty of divine wisdom. How could such a simple creature bear the weight of the new world that was coming? The raven was torn, its wings carrying it across the same skies that had once been full of divine clarity. It had heard the divine call to help Noah, to guide him through the storm. Yet, how could it offer such guidance without revealing too much? To show too much, to reveal God's plans too early, would disrupt the delicate balance of creation. Noah had to remain unaware of the full scope of his role. His faith, though steadfast, was still fragile, and the raven's presence was both a blessing and a test. Each flight to and from the ark weighed heavily upon the raven's heart. How much could it give without destroying the trust between Noah and the Creator? How could it fulfill its mission without becoming more than what it was meant to be? The raven longed to speak plainly, to reveal all that was destined for Noah. But the raven knew better. Faith was a fragile thing, a thing that could not be forced or rushed. It was something that must unfold in its own time. The message had to be conveyed in whispers, in signs, in the stillness of the storm. The raven's wings beat slowly against the winds, the uncertainty and doubts swirling like the waters below. It hovered just outside Noah's view, watching him pray, watching him struggle to make sense of a world that had turned against him. But the raven could not offer answers, could not reveal the truth that hovered just beyond Noah's reach. It could only guide, only trust that Noah's faith would be enough. And so, the raven continued its flights, the weight of its duty pressing down upon it. It was a messenger caught between two worlds, the divine and the human, the known and the unknown. In its flight, it felt the fragility of faith, the uncertainty of its role, and the unshakable truth that sometimes the path to salvation must be walked in darkness. As the ark drifted on the still waters, the raven could feel the weight of its wings growing heavier with each passing day. The storm had subsided, the floodwaters began to settle, and the ark, once carried by the violent surge of the oceans, now floated in an uncertain stillness. The raven, flying above the ark, had watched as the world was cleansed. It had done its duty, guided the vessel through the wrath of the waters. But now, as the winds calmed and the rain ceased, the question lingered in its heart. Why had it been chosen? The answer was not something the raven had received from its celestial charge. There was no clear divine voice to guide it, no instruction that would explain why it, a creature born from the earth and sky, had been tasked with such an immense responsibility. It had delivered the messages, circled the ark day after day, but in the silence that followed the storm, the raven felt the emptiness of its role. Noah stood at the edge of the ark, gazing out into the distance, as though the land they sought was a promise from a world yet to be fully reborn. The raven, ever watchful, circled above, peering down at the land's edge. The mountains that had once towered above the earth now lay cloaked in mist, their peaks barely visible. The green of trees and the rush of rivers were returning slowly to the earth, signaling the birth of a new era. But for the raven, the land ahead was both a promise and a mystery. Noah was a man of faith, and it was his unwavering belief that had carried him through the storm, kept him safe when the heavens raged. Yet the raven couldn't shake the feeling that it, too, had been tested. The days of flight had been long, and with each day, its purpose felt both clearer and more elusive. It had guided Noah, but in its heart, it questioned whether it was truly the right being for such a task. The raven, a creature so often overlooked in the grand design of the heavens, had been given the monumental responsibility of leading a soul through the final judgment of the earth. Why had it, of all creatures, been entrusted with such a divine mission? The question echoed in its mind as it flew toward the land. It wasn't for the raven to know, perhaps. The divine plan was vast and unknowable, and its place within it was as small as the wings that beat tirelessly against the winds. Still, the raven continued to fly, watching as Noah prepared to step onto the dry earth, the first human to set foot in a world so profoundly changed. And as the ark came to rest, the raven hovered above, feeling the ground beneath it solidify with the same uncertain truth that had followed it through the storm, that its journey, though shrouded in mystery, had led to something greater than itself. The world had changed, but the raven could not shake the weight of what had come before. As the first light of a new day broke across the earth, it illuminated the desolate landscape below, the remnants of the flood's rage still evident in the twisted trees and the newly formed rivers that cut through the once familiar terrain. The sky, now a soft blue rather than the storm-laden gray it had once been, seemed to carry the weight of an uncertain peace. Everything was silent. The birds that had once filled the air with songs now appeared hesitant, almost fearful of the new world they would have to learn to live in. The raven, perched high on a branch of a solitary tree, surveyed the scene before it. The land was unrecognizable. Once filled with the hum of life, now it seemed empty, hollow, as though it too mourned the loss of what had been. The floodwaters had carried away everything those who had not been saved. The old world, the old ways. Now there was only the task of rebuilding, of returning life to the earth in some semblance of what it had once been. But that process was not easy. It would take time, and it would take more than faith alone to restore what had been lost. Noah and his family were already hard at work, planting seeds, constructing shelters, trying to revive the earth. Yet, as the raven watched from its perch, it saw more than the physical labor. It saw the weight in Noah's eyes, the uncertainty of a man who had been spared, but had no way of knowing how to begin anew. They were the survivors, but their survival came at a price that could not be easily measured. The raven had carried God's message of salvation, but the aftermath was not the triumph of redemption. It was the slow, painful rebuilding of a world that had been shattered. The raven flapped its wings and flew low over the land, as though seeking some answer that had been denied. It had done its duty, had served as the messenger between heaven and earth. But now that it was over, it wondered if the task had been worth the price. It had watched the destruction, had seen the floodwaters rise and carry away the evidence of man's sins and the corruption of the earth. And now, it felt as though it, too, was complicit in the devastation. There was no joy in the silence that followed the flood, and no satisfaction in the newness of life that was being forced to emerge from the ashes. The raven had been chosen to carry out God's will, and in doing so, it had helped bring about the end of an age. It had delivered the message. It had guided the ark. But now, standing witness to the aftermath, it felt a quiet sorrow for what had been lost, for the world that would never return. It was a new beginning. Yes, but it was also the closing of a chapter that could never be rewritten. The raven could only watch as the earth slowly began to heal, knowing that it, too, was a part of this fractured story. The raven sat perched atop a jagged rock, the evening sun casting long shadows across the landscape. The world, though reborn from the flood, still felt foreign to the bird, as though it too were struggling to remember what it had once been. In the quiet, the raven often found itself lost in thought, unable to escape the heavy realization that had settled in its heart. It had fulfilled its mission, carried out the divine will as commanded. Yet something deeper, something hidden, lingered within. For all the talk of being an instrument of God, for all the lofty purposes it had been told to fulfill, The raven now understood that its connection to the divine was not merely that of a servant. There was something more, something ancient, something profound. It had been tasked with guiding Noah, protecting the ark, delivering messages, but it had never truly understood why it had been chosen. Why had God called upon such a creature seemingly insignificant, often cast aside by humans as a mere scavenger? The raven's eyes gleamed with a light that had not been there before, a sharpness that cut through the darkness of the night. It had learned so much in its journey, the depth of divine patience, the weight of faith, the fragility of creation. But hidden beneath all of that, buried deep within the essence of its being, was the secret that only it knew. It had always been a messenger, yes, but the raven now realized it was more than that. It was the bridge between heaven and earth, the thread that connected the divine to the mundane in ways that went beyond its earthly tasks. It had watched the watchers descend, seen the corruption of mankind, and participated in the cleansing that followed. It had felt the weight of the flood upon its wings, the devastation carried in every gust of wind that blew across the desolate earth. But in those moments of stillness, when it had sat alone, reflecting on its flight, the raven had uncovered something startling. It had always been a part of this divine plan, a fragment of heaven itself, placed on earth for a purpose far greater than it could have imagined. In its feathers, in its very bones, the raven carried the memory of the divine, a reminder of the celestial realms that had given it life. It had been created not just to serve, but to understand, to witness the fall and rise of creation, to stand as a testament to the eternal balance between light and dark. It had not merely been chosen for its role in the flood, but for its connection to something older, something primal, woven into the fabric of the universe itself. As it soared high into the night sky, the raven felt the weight of this secret settle within its soul. It was not merely a creature of flight, of mystery, of darkness. It was the keeper of an ancient truth, a truth that could never be fully spoken, only understood in the quiet moments between the winds. The raven was both messenger and witness, servant and divine being forever bound to the eternal dance of creation. The raven had long since grown accustomed to the silence that followed the great flood, a silence that filled the world with both promise and dread. The land was still, the air heavy with the weight of rebirth, and yet something whispered in the darkness, something unseen. It was in these moments of quiet that the raven found itself drawn to the shadows more than ever before. It no longer flew solely in the light of day. The night had become its true domain, a realm where it had learned to carry messages far deeper than the ones it had once delivered in the sunlight. As the world began its slow, painful reconstruction, the raven's task grew ever more complex. It had once been a simple messenger, tasked with the mundane duties of guiding Noah's Ark and delivering instructions from the divine. But now, in the stillness of the post-flood world, it had become something more. It had become a harbinger, a being that not only conveyed divine truth but also carried the weight of the knowledge that could not be ignored. The raven's wings had long ceased to be symbols of merely flight. They now served as vessels of foresight, bearing messages that the world was not yet ready to hear. The messages came to the raven as whispers in the wind, faint but persistent, cutting through the quiet like the subtle shifting of the earth beneath its talons. It was not an easy burden to bear, but the raven had learned, over countless cycles of time, that its duty was far from over. With each message, each warning, the raven felt the tension grow, the tension between the knowing and the unknowable, the sacred and the profane. What was it, it wondered, that made it the chosen bearer of these truths? Was it truly its wings that had earned it this role? Or was there something deeper, something woven into the very core of its being? It was during these moments of reflection, perched high upon the twisted branches of ancient trees, that the raven understood its place. It was not merely a creature of flight. It was an agent of divine judgment, the messenger who walked between worlds. The world of light had been cleansed, but the world of shadow, the world of secrets, still needed its attention. And so, it flew through the darkest nights, gliding silently over the new lands, carrying messages of great weight and deep consequence. In the distance, it saw the flicker of fires that would burn out of control, the faint shadow of a future where the world would once again bend toward corruption. It could not speak of these things openly. It was not yet time. But the raven knew that its wings carried more than just the winds of earth. They carried divine truth, the truth that could not be ignored, no matter how much the world sought to silence it. As it soared on silent wings through the gathering shadows, the raven felt both the burden and the privilege of its existence. It was a creature of prophecy, a bearer of things unseen, not just a messenger, but a shadow that carried the weight of heaven itself. It understood now that its journey had never been about the simple delivery of words. It had always been about the truths that needed to be revealed when the world was ready to hear them. The raven had always been a solitary figure, its divine mission, soaring through the skies alone, a harbinger of truth and shadow. But on one of its quiet journeys, a presence caught its attention, a brilliant, fiery glow on the horizon, bright enough to rival the sun itself. The raven, ever vigilant, approached cautiously, drawn by the force of the light that seemed to pulse with life itself. As it drew closer, it saw the figure that stood at the center of the glow, a majestic being of fire and flame, wings burning with the intensity of 1,000 suns. The phoenix, as old as time itself, stood there in all its glory, its form shifting, flickering like a flame caught in the wind. Its eyes, ancient and wise, met the raven's, and for the first time in countless years, the raven felt something it had not known before, the warmth of shared understanding. The phoenix, born anew from its ashes, greeted the raven not with words, but with an understanding that transcended speech. It was a being of cycles, born to rise from death, to be consumed by flames and reborn again, forever bound to the rhythm of transformation. The raven, in its own way, understood this truth. It too had witnessed cycles of death and rebirth, perhaps not as grand as the phoenix's fiery death. But in its own subtle way, it had seen the world shift and change, life rising from the ashes of destruction. As they stood together, the raven observed the phoenix with a new sense of awe. The creature was not bound by time in the way the raven had been. It was the embodiment of transformation, a force that defied death itself. The phoenix's rebirth seemed effortless, natural, and yet the raven understood the deep sorrow and triumph hidden within it. To die and rise again was not merely an act of strength, it was a surrender, a letting go of all that had come before in order to embrace the new. In this meeting of divine beings, the raven began to understand a greater truth: the role of death in creation. The phoenix's rise from ashes mirrored the world's own constant rebirth, the balance between destruction and creation, endings and beginnings. The raven's own journey had always been marked by this tension, the weight of duty balanced by the promise of renewal. As the phoenix spread its fiery wings and ascended into the sky, its form shimmering and fading into the light, the raven felt a sense of unity with this creature of flame. Its own mission, once shrouded in shadow, now seemed brighter, imbued with a new understanding of transformation and resurrection. The raven was not just a messenger. It too was part of the cycle, a piece of a greater story that wove together death and life, darkness and light. And as the phoenix disappeared into the heavens, the raven understood its journey, like the phoenix's, was never truly about endings. It was about what could rise from the ashes. The raven's wings sliced through the air, carrying it far across the land, from one horizon to the next. It had long understood its task as a messenger, but now it felt a burden more pressing than ever. It had delivered its messages before warnings of things to come, truths that had to be known. But this time, as it soared towards the gathering places of humanity, something felt different. It was not just a message it bore, it was a plea, a cry to the hearts of those who had walked the earth. The world below had grown restless, its inhabitants lost in the tumult of their own choices. The light of creation, once bright and clear, now flickered dimly in their hearts. The ravens saw the way they turned toward power, grasping for fleeting satisfaction, and the way they stumbled, blind to the dangers of their desires. The seeds of darkness had taken root, and the shadows seemed to spread, tightening their hold on humanity's soul. But within those shadows, a flicker of light remained, a glimmer of hope. The raven landed quietly on a rocky perch, watching humans below as they went about their lives, unaware of the choice that lay before them. It could see the potential within each heart, the same potential it had seen in its earliest days, created in the image of something divine, yet capable of both great beauty and great destruction. The raven knew that this was not a task it could complete alone. It had delivered warnings and guidance before, but now it was time for humanity to choose. The message it carried was simple, yet profound. You stand at a crossroads. Choose the path of light, or be consumed by the darkness that calls to you. It was not a command. It was an invitation, a call to awaken, to see the truth that had always been. The raven's purpose had never been to force a decision, but to present the choice clearly, without illusion or hesitation. The raven's gaze fell upon a young woman standing in a field, her hands trembling as she looked toward the distant mountains. There was uncertainty in her eyes, but also something more, a knowing. The raven could feel it. She had already heard the call, perhaps not in the way it had spoken, but in the whispers of her own heart. She was not alone. Every human heart felt the pull, some more deeply than others, but all of them stood in this moment of choice. The raven's call echoed through the land, not loud or forceful, but gentle, persistent, like the rustling of leaves in the wind. Choose the light, it whispered, for it is in the light that you will find your true purpose, your true peace. And with that, the raven took to the skies once more, leaving behind the world that would decide its fate. It had done its part. The rest was up to them. The raven perched high on a craggy cliff, its eyes scanning the horizon where humanity began to fracture, like cracks spreading through the earth. What had begun as a simple choice, a call to light and truth, had become a battleground for the hearts and souls of mankind. It watched as the first fissures appeared, small at first, like whispers of dissent, but soon they grew into deep divides. Those who had heard the raven's call and embraced it formed communities bound by a shared vision of peace, understanding, and light. But in the shadows, others rejected the message, choosing instead to cling to their power, their pride, their fear. The raven's heart, once light with purpose, grew heavier with each passing day. It had known that the task would not be simple. But the extent of humanity's resistance was far more than it had ever imagined. Factions arose, some rallying to the cause of light, others burning with defiance, their hearts hardening against the call they had once heard. There were those who twisted the message, reshaping it into something unrecognizable, using it as a tool for their own selfish gain. And there were those who turned completely away, preferring the darkness, the illusion of control, to the vulnerability that came with choosing the light. The raven had delivered its message, but the burden of seeing its consequences unfold was a weight it had not anticipated. It had hoped that the choice would be clear, that humanity, with its boundless potential, would choose the light in a great wave of understanding. But now, as the world teetered on the edge of chaos, the raven realized that the true test had only just begun. It was not enough to merely bring the message. The message had to be lived, and that was something humanity had to decide for itself. In the distance, the raven saw the dark shapes of armies gathering, not with swords but with words, ideologies, and fears. They clung to the shadows, embracing the lies that allowed them to feel powerful and in control. The raven's wings ached to carry a warning to them, to show them the path that led back to the light. But it could not force the decision. It had done all it could, and now the weight of the world seemed to rest on humanity's fragile shoulders. As the factions grew in number, so too did the raven's sense of isolation. It had been the bearer of divine knowledge, but the knowledge was now a burden. Each division, each rebellion, felt like a failure, not of its own making but of the hearts it had tried to save. The raven's task was far from over, but it felt more distant from the world it had once helped guide. It flew across the fractured land, searching for signs of hope, but the darkness was growing, and the weight of the struggle pressed harder against its wings with each passing day. The sky was heavy, filled with a tension that seemed to vibrate through the very air. The raven perched on the edge of the celestial expanse, its dark feathers barely moving, blending with the shadows. Below, the watchers stood, their once glistening forms now tarnished by their rebellion. They had defied the natural order, descending to the earth, abandoning their heavenly duties, and giving in to temptation. Now, they stood before the throne of divine judgment, awaiting the reckoning for their choices. It was a scene unlike any other, one of such solemnity and finality that even the stars themselves seemed to hold their breath. The watchers, tall and proud in their celestial power, no longer exuded the beauty and grace that had once marked their status among the heavens. Their arrogance, their pride, and their sins weighed heavily upon them, forming chains that bound their spirits in ways no physical restraint could. They stood silent, their eyes cast downward, not daring to meet the gaze of the one who now looked upon them with neither anger nor pity, but with a quiet sorrow that cut deeper than any fury. The raven, unnoticed, hovered at the edges of the scene, a silent witness to the unfolding drama. It had no voice in this moment, no power to alter the course of what was happening, but it understood. Its wings, black as the void, ached with the weight of knowing that this trial was not only for the watchers. It was for all who had ever chosen rebellion over order, darkness over light. The raven knew that its task had been part of a larger design, and now it was watching the consequences unfold in a way that felt both distant and intimately close. The watchers, once the guardians of creation, stood before the Creator, their sins laid bare. They had corrupted the beauty of the world, tainted the innocence of the first humans, and brought chaos where there had once been harmony. They had shared forbidden knowledge, not in the service of humanity, but for their own desires, and their actions had irrevocably altered the course of life on earth. Each of their transgressions was recounted, each moment of arrogance, each act of defiance, weighed in the balance of divine justice. The raven could feel the tension, the weight of truth and consequence pressing down on all of creation. The watchers were not merely being judged for what they had done. They were being judged for what they had chosen to be beings who had once known the light and turned away from it. As the judgment was pronounced, the watchers fell, not in battle but in quiet submission, their punishment sealed. Their fate was to be bound, locked away in a place between worlds, a prison of eternal waiting. The raven, its heart heavy with understanding, watched as they were cast into the abyss, their rebellion no longer able to taint the earth they had once sought to dominate. The celestial drama had played out, and the world would now begin the slow process of healing. But the raven knew this moment was only the beginning. The echoes of the Watchers' rebellion would resonate far beyond the heavens, touching everything in their wake. And the raven, bound to its mission, would continue to carry the weight of divine truth to a world that still struggled to find its way. The earth trembled beneath a sky that seemed to darken as if responding to an ancient call. The Nephilim had returned. Their massive forms appeared once more on the horizon, towering over the lands with an air of arrogance that mirrored their predecessors. These beings, born of forbidden union between celestial beings and mortal flesh, were no mere creatures. They were the giants, the titans, now walking the earth once again, challenging the very fabric of divine order. The raven, whose wings had carried it through countless trials, felt the shift in the air, the pulse of something wrong. The winds whispered of the Nephilim's return, and the world, still recovering from the flood, shuddered. It had known this moment would come. It had carried the messages, warned humanity. Yet in the deep places of its spirit, the raven understood that this time the stakes were far higher. The earth that had been cleansed by the waters was once again in danger. The balance between the divine and the mortal was teetering on the edge, threatened by beings who had no place in this world. As the raven took flight, its dark wings slicing through the air with urgency, it could feel the weight of its task press down like a heavy burden. Its mission was clear. It had been sent to warn humanity once again, to carry the message that the Nephilim, now risen, would bring only destruction. The giants moved with power and grace, their presence an undeniable force that seemed to shake the very earth beneath them. They were not merely men. They were something else, something older and more dangerous, a reminder of the corruption that had once been cast into the abyss. The raven soared above the lands, its eyes sharp and watchful as it looked down upon the people. There were those who feared and those who welcomed the giants. Some saw the Nephilim as powerful beings, perhaps gods in their own right, believing they could offer strength and protection in exchange for their worship. Others, less certain, felt the unease in their bones, knowing deep down that this return was not a sign of hope but of further decay. The raven knew that the message it carried was not one of hope, but one of warning humanity would once again face a choice. They would either bow to the Nephilim, allowing them to reign once again, or they would stand firm and reject the chaos these giants sought to bring. As it flew, the raven's heart felt heavy with the knowledge of what was to come. It had delivered the messages before, yet this time felt different. The Nephilim had returned with a renewed purpose, and with them, the challenge to divine order was greater than ever. The raven could not fight this battle directly. Its role was to warn, to guide, to bear witness. But in the deepest corners of its soul, it wondered if humanity had learned enough to choose the right path, or if the echoes of the past would once again plunge the world into darkness. The raven perched on a twisted branch, its dark wings heavy with the weight of the world. For the first time since its journey began, it felt the crushing weight of its task, the burden it had been entrusted with pressing down upon its heart. It had flown across the earth, delivering messages of salvation and warning, but now, as the years dragged on, it began to see the toll of its mission. The pain of both the fallen and the faithful seemed to entwine in a never-ending cycle, each struggle a reminder of the futility of its role. It had watched humanity falter and rise again, struggling to find the path between light and darkness. It had seen the faithful cling to hope even when their world was consumed by chaos, while the fallen reveled in the destruction they caused, their hearts hardened by pride and sin. The raven had witnessed countless souls lost to the shadows, but it had also seen the spark of hope that still flickered in the hearts of those who chose the path of light. Yet the suffering, the endless struggle, the weight of the choices that had been made, it all seemed to crush the raven's spirit. It had been chosen for this task. But why? Why had it been burdened with such a heavy responsibility, to witness the endless cycle of despair and redemption? The raven had always believed that its duty was clear, that it was a messenger, a guide between worlds. But with each passing day, that clarity faded. The message it carried seemed lost in the noise of a broken world. It had brought warnings, and yet the chaos only deepened. It had guided the faithful, but their faith seemed fragile, as though it might shatter at any moment. The raven began to doubt, to question its purpose. Was it truly the divine's will that it be the bearer of such pain? Or was it a cruel twist of fate, a punishment for some unknown sin committed long ago? Each time it saw the suffering of those it could not help, it wondered if it had been chosen not for its strength, but for its ability to endure the crushing weight of eternal responsibility. The raven's heart grew heavy with doubt. It could not escape the sight of the world's endless suffering, and the silence that followed the messages it carried haunted its every moment. The burden of being both a witness and a messenger, a silent observer of a world that seemed to spiral into chaos, weighed heavily upon its spirit. It had been chosen for this role, but the cost was high, higher than it had ever anticipated. It longed for release, for respite from the endless flight, the constant carrying of messages that seemed to have little power to change the course of fate. In the quiet of the night, as it rested between its journeys, the raven wondered if it would ever find peace, or if it was doomed to carry this burden for eternity. The skies had darkened as the raven took flight, its wings beating against the wind with a heavy, reluctant rhythm. The message it carried was not one of hope or redemption, but of sorrow, a sorrow that weighed upon its chest as the heavens themselves seemed to mourn. The Watchers, those celestial beings once entrusted with the care of the earth, had defied the divine order. They had descended to the mortal realm, their hearts corrupted by desires they were never meant to know. Their betrayal had set into motion a cascade of destruction, the consequences of which rippled across the world. The raven's path led it above the gathering of divine forces, those who had come to witness the final judgment. It knew what was to come, what had been ordained from the beginning, but the knowledge did nothing to ease the ache in its heart. Heaven's anger had been building, a tempest that had waited patiently, silently, for the moment when judgment would fall upon the fallen. The Watchers had failed in their mission, their pride and their lust for power twisting their very essence. And now, as the time of reckoning arrived, the raven was to bear witness to their final fall. Hovering in the air, the raven's eyes fell upon the assembly of angels, their radiant forms cast in stark contrast to the darkness below. The air crackled with divine energy, the tension palpable as the celestial host awaited their orders. The raven's heart swelled with an unfamiliar sorrow. It had once been tasked with guiding, with offering messages of hope. But this was not a task any being, celestial or otherwise, should ever be burdened with. With a reluctant flap of its wings, the raven descended to the place where the Watchers stood bound, shackled by their own sins, awaiting their fate. Once, they had stood tall, their heavenly light shining brighter than the stars themselves. Now, their once glorious forms were dimmed, consumed by the darkness of their rebellion. The raven's call was low, barely a whisper, yet it carried with it the weight of the divine decree. "You have strayed far from the path," the raven intoned, its voice carrying the echo of a sorrow deeper than any words could convey. "The judgment is upon you, and there is no mercy left." The Watchers did not speak. Their eyes, once bright with divine understanding, now bore only the empty weight of regret. Some looked to the heavens, but there was no answer, only silence. Others turned to the raven, their eyes pleading, but it could offer no comfort. It had been chosen to bear witness to their betrayal, but it was not there to offer reprieve. The raven flew away, leaving behind the Watchers as their final judgment was pronounced. Their rebellion had led to their downfall, and now they would be cast into the depths of the abyss, bound in chains of divine justice, their fate sealed by their own choices. The raven's heart did not lighten as it flew back into the sky. The world had been altered, and it was not a change that could be undone. The raven had seen the destruction of the Watchers, and it knew this was just the beginning of a greater reckoning yet to come. The raven's wings cut through the twilight sky, a shadow against the fading light of a dying day. Its mind, once so certain of its purpose, now felt like an ocean stirred by an unseen storm. Beneath the surface, ancient whispers stirred secrets that had lain hidden for eons, buried beneath the dust of time and the weight of divine will. It had always believed that its role was clear, a messenger of truth, a servant of the divine. But now, as the winds carried fragments of forbidden knowledge, it began to wonder if it had ever truly understood the depths of its task. The raven had long observed the world below, seeing the rise and fall of civilizations, the choices of men and gods alike. But today, something had shifted. As it flew, it found itself drawn to an ancient temple, hidden deep in the heart of the earth. Its wings slowed, and it perched upon the crumbling stone, its sharp eyes scanning the forgotten relics of a time long past. The air was thick with the weight of history, with a heavy silence that spoke of knowledge never meant to be uncovered. It was there, in the shadows of the ruined walls, that the raven first heard the whispers. They were faint, barely perceptible, as though the very stones themselves were speaking through the cracks. Words of a time before the flood, of the watchers who had once walked the earth as gods. The raven listened, its heart pounding with the weight of what it was hearing. These were not the tales it had been told, these were not the stories passed down by the celestial beings who had created it. No, these whispers spoke of something far older, something more dangerous. The Watchers had not simply fallen from grace. They had once held a secret knowledge, a power that had been too much for them to handle. It was knowledge forbidden to all but the highest of celestial beings, knowledge that could warp the very fabric of existence. The raven's thoughts raced. It had been a tool of the divine, but was it possible that it too had been shaped by this ancient, forbidden wisdom? Was its connection to the Watchers more than it had ever known? It had never questioned the nature of its creation, the purpose it had been given, but now the foundations of its understanding trembled beneath the weight of these revelations. As the whispers faded into the night, the raven took flight once more, its wings heavy with the burden of what it had learned. The world seemed smaller now, more fragile. The cosmic struggle it had long served in felt less like a divine plan and more like a complex web of secrets, betrayals, and choices that stretched far beyond its understanding. It no longer knew where it fit in this great cosmic struggle. Was it merely a servant of the divine, or something more, caught in the web of forgotten history? The raven looked out over the earth, its eyes reflecting the shadow of doubt that now lingered in its soul. The past, it realized, was not as simple as it had once believed. It was woven with complexity and darkness, and the raven could no longer deny its part in the ever-unfolding story. The raven soared high, its wings slicing through the air with a precision born of countless years of flight. Yet, beneath the steady rhythm of its wings, a new weight pressed on its chest, an unsettling feeling that had grown steadily stronger. It had long believed that its role was unique, that it was the sole chosen messenger, entrusted with the secrets of heaven and tasked with guiding humanity through the storm of divine judgment. But now, as it soared over the world below, it realized with a sinking heart that its path was not as solitary as it had imagined. The sky stretched wide and endless before it. Yet, as the raven flew, it saw something unexpected on the horizon, a dark gathering, a shifting of wings, a sudden darkening of the air. It wasn't a storm. It wasn't a shadow cast by the setting sun. It was a group of ravens, many of them, their wings outstretched as they moved in unison. The raven felt the stirrings of something deep within its being, a connection, a recognition. These were not mere birds, not ordinary creatures. These were others like it chosen, perhaps like it had been, to carry the weight of divine knowledge. The raven's heart raced. For so long, it had believed itself alone, its purpose clear and uninterrupted. But here, in the sky above the earth, it found its kin, a council of ravens who, like it, had been marked for a greater task. They circled in the sky, their numbers growing, their wings a silent testament to the power they wielded, the message they were entrusted to carry. As they drew closer, the raven's mind began to whirl. It had never considered the possibility that it was not alone in this task, that there were others like it who had been sent by the divine to deliver messages of truth. What did this mean for its purpose? Would the arrival of these other ravens alter its mission, or had it all been part of a greater plan, one it had never understood? They landed, their forms like dark shadows against the pale horizon, and the raven, instinctively, joined them. A silence passed between them, one filled with questions, but none dared speak. Each raven seemed lost in thought, as though unsure of what to say, unsure of what role it had played in the grand scheme of things. The weight of the collective task hung over them like a cloud, as the divine council seemed to wait for something, a sign, perhaps a decision they must make together. The raven, still unsure of its place in the gathering, took a deep breath and found its voice. This was not a moment of division or discord. This was a moment of unity. Together, they would decide what was to come. Together, they would carry out their purpose, whatever that might be. And for the first time, the raven felt not just the weight of its task, but the weight of something greater. The responsibility not just to itself, but to its kin, to the divine will that had brought them all together. The raven had always believed itself a mere servant, bound to the skies by duty, tasked with delivering messages that none but it could bear. It had been a harbinger, a creature of shadow and light, a symbol of both warning and salvation. But as the years passed and its wings carried it further into the world, the raven began to feel the weight of its purpose in a way it had never understood before. There was something deeper, something more profound hidden within its flight. Its presence, it wasn't just a messenger of divine will, it was a vessel of something far more sacred. Mercy. For so long, the raven had been drawn to the divine calls, responding to every whisper of judgment and every cry for help. It had flown to the edges of creation, perched at the hearts of storms, and gazed upon the suffering of mankind. It had seen the fall of kingdoms, the rise and collapse of empires, and the darkness that crept like a shadow across the face of humanity. It had witnessed the sin of mankind and the rebellion of angels, and in all of it, the raven had flown, delivering the word, offering the warning. But in that flight, it had never asked why, never understood what the message truly meant. Now, as it soared over the earth once more, a new understanding took root in its heart. The raven was not just a creature of judgment. It was the bearer of healing, the embodiment of grace. In the moments when the world seemed most lost, it had always been the raven that came, its wings sweeping across the skies like the hand of a divine healer. It was in that same stillness that it had witnessed humanity's greatest despair and its most fleeting hope. The raven had seen how the weight of sin could crush the soul, how the burden of guilt could leave one broken. And yet, with every flight, with every message, it also saw the potential for redemption, the possibility of healing even in the darkest of times. For the first time, the raven understood that its task was not just to deliver the truth, but to guide those who had strayed back to the light. It had flown through the storms of divine judgment, seen the walls of despair that humanity had built around itself. But now, it realized, it was not just called to witness their fall. It was called to guide them to rise again. As it perched atop a solitary mountain, gazing out over the earth below, the raven spread its wings wide, feeling the pulse of divine mercy coursing through it. It wasn't simply a creature of shadows anymore, nor was it a silent observer. It was a symbol of hope, of rebirth. It was a beacon for those lost in darkness, a sign that no matter how deep the fall, there was always the chance for redemption. And in that realization, the raven found peace, knowing that its mission was far greater than it had ever imagined. It was not merely the bearer of judgment, it was the bringer of salvation. The earth trembled beneath the clash of forces, and the sky above grew dark with the weight of impending doom. It was the culmination of all that had been foretold, the final war between the light and the darkness. A battle that had been building since the first whispers of creation. The forces of good and evil, long divided, now converged in a cataclysmic clash that would decide the fate of all. Angels, demons, titans, and humanity all had a part to play in this war. Yet amidst the chaos, one creature flew higher than the rest, its wings cutting through the storm like a symbol of the eternal struggle between light and shadow. The raven had watched from the edges of time, knowing that its moment would come, though it could never have imagined this. It was not just a witness anymore. It was not simply carrying messages of warning or hope. No. The raven had become something far more. A mediator. A bridge between the divided worlds. Tasked with navigating the war that now raged across the heavens and the earth. It soared above the battlefield, its feathers dark as night, but its heart alight with the clarity of divine purpose. Below, the earth was torn asunder. The skies crackled with the clash of celestial forces, and the cries of those caught in the middle echoed through the chaos. The raven, with its unyielding wings and the weight of its responsibility, flew between the two sides, carrying neither sword nor shield, but the message that had always been its charge. It was the only being who could stand between the light and the darkness, not as a warrior, but as a witness bearing the truth that could save or destroy. The battle raged on, each side fighting not just for dominance, but for survival. The angels, burning with the light of heaven, clashed with the dark legions that sought to twist creation into their image. Titans, ancient and powerful, unleashed their fury upon the earth, while humanity watched in terror, unsure of which side they could trust. Amidst the battle's roar, the raven delivered its message, a message of salvation, of the possibility of peace, even as the very fabric of existence seemed to tear itself apart. It was then that the raven realized its true role. It had been sent not to fight, but to mediate, to offer the possibility of redemption to those who had lost their way. It was not here to choose sides, for in the end, the raven knew that the true battle lay not between the armies of heaven and hell, but within the hearts of those who would decide the fate of the world. With every flight, with every cry of its wings, the raven carried the last hope of healing. As the war raged on, the raven flew higher still, carrying the message of light and darkness, knowing that this battle, like all others, was just another chapter in the eternal struggle. But it was also the end of an age, and perhaps the beginning of a new one. The raven had always been a witness, a creature who flew between the worlds, carrying divine messages and offering counsel. But it was now called to something deeper, something beyond the earthly plane. There was more to the battle it had served in than it could have ever understood. The veil that separated the realms had thinned, and the raven, for the first time, was drawn beyond the material world. Guided by beings of light and shadow, it embarked on a journey through unseen realms, places where the laws of creation were but faint whispers, and the forces at play could not be understood with mere eyes. The journey began with an invitation. A gentle, unseen force beckoned the raven, drawing it away from the battlefield, beyond the tumult and the cries of war. The raven felt the subtle pull, like an ancient, magnetic force, a call it had never before recognized. And so, it followed. First, the raven flew through the veil of light, where time unraveled, and everything it knew about existence seemed to bend. It passed through realms of divine beauty, bathed in light so pure that it felt as though its very feathers might disintegrate in the glow. Here, in the presence of the holy, the raven was guided by angels. They whispered of the beginning, of creation's first breath, and of the celestial order that had once reigned. These beings spoke not with words but with profound understanding, revealing to the raven the purpose it had served since the beginning of time. It was more than a messenger. It had been chosen to balance the forces of light and darkness, to be the bridge between worlds, the silent observer whose wings held the fate of all. But the raven's journey did not end there. From the light, it descended into the depths of shadow. The air grew thick with the weight of ancient sorrow, and the raven found itself enveloped by darkness so complete that it could not see its wings. Here, demons moved in the shadows, their voices like winds through dead trees. They spoke in riddles, their eyes glowing with malevolent knowledge. They, too, had a purpose. They, too, served the grand design, albeit from the depths of corruption. The raven, now aware of the eternal struggle between these two opposing forces, felt its understanding of the balance grow more complex. It was not just a servant of light but an instrument within the eternal war. Through these realms, guided by angels and demons alike, the raven learned of its place in the grand scheme of things. It was the one who carried the knowledge that both saved and condemned, the one who flew above it all but was tethered to it deeply. The forces it had served, the angels and demons, were not so different. They both sought balance, but their methods, their means of achieving it, were as opposite as light and dark. The raven understood now. It was not simply a passive observer but a necessary force in the universe's eternal cycle, a force that could tip the balance, for better or worse. The knowledge it carried was not one of destruction, but of the delicate thread that connected creation itself. A thread pulled taut between unseen hands, and as the raven returned from the unseen realms, it carried this newfound wisdom, knowing its task was far greater than it had ever imagined. It was not merely to deliver messages, it was to ensure that the balance was upheld, even if it had to bear the weight of eternity itself. The raven hovered in the space between worlds, its wings cutting through the stillness like the whisper of a forgotten memory. Before it, vast and unyielding, lay the cosmic scales of justice. They stretched out across the heavens, more magnificent and terrifying than anything the raven had ever witnessed. They were not mere symbols but living, breathing forces that held the weight of creation itself. Each side of the scale was vast on one side, the weight of mercy, and on the other, the weight of wrath. The raven had long understood that these scales determined the fate of all things, but now it saw them in their full, raw power. It was a moment unlike any other. The scales trembled, as if caught in the grip of an unseen hand. On one side, the soft, golden light of mercy shone gently, like a warm sunrise, casting long shadows across the endless void. On the other, a darkness so deep it seemed to swallow the stars hung heavy, threatening to tear apart everything in its wake. The raven could feel the pull of both sides, the tender call of compassion and the searing burn of judgment. Both were essential. Both were necessary, but neither could be allowed to tip too far. The raven's heart stirred with the weight of it all. It had seen mercy before the forgiveness of those who had fallen, the redemption of those who had turned from their wicked ways. But wrath, too. It had witnessed the devastation of the wicked, the fiery destruction of the unjust, the toll that sin took on the world. The scales before it were not the creations of man but the breath of the divine, and they had been steady for eons, carefully balanced by the forces that governed the universe. But today, the raven saw something different. The scales were beginning to tip. The forces of wrath seemed to grow stronger, pulling the scale lower with each passing moment. The raven understood what this meant. Judgment was near. The time for mercy was running out. It had been called upon many times to carry messages of hope, but now it understood the inevitable truth. There could be no mercy without judgment, no forgiveness without consequence. The raven, now a silent witness to this divine struggle, felt the pull of both sides deep within its being. It had always flown between light and darkness, but this was the moment where both forces would collide in a way that would change everything. The raven's wings shuddered with the gravity of it all. It had been the bearer of messages, but this was different. This was the moment where the divine balance would tip, and all of creation would feel the ripple of its consequences. It did not know which way the scales would fall, but it knew that the weight of both mercy and wrath would shape the future in ways unimaginable. And so, the raven watched, knowing that the scales of justice would not wait for anyone. The judgment was near, and it was part of the story, part of the eternal balance that would, in the end, define the fate of all. The raven sat alone in the vast expanse of the universe, its wings folded against its body as it drifted silently through the void. The stars seemed to hang above it, distant and untouchable, as though they too were contemplating the meaning of their own existence. The raven, despite its divine purpose and the many messages it had carried, found itself lost in a sea of uncertainty. It had always been the vessel of God's will, a messenger between realms. But now, in the quiet between moments, it began to question the very essence of its being. Why had it been chosen for this task? It was but a creature of shadow and wing, dark and often misunderstood. There were others, greater beings, angels, and forces that commanded the heavens, but it was the raven that had been entrusted with the weight of divine messages. It had flown between the worlds, seen the rise and fall of empires, and carried the pleas of both the wicked and the righteous. Yet, in all its travels, the raven had never fully understood why it was the one to carry these burdens. Was it because of its flight, its ability to soar between the realms? Or was it something deeper, something woven into its very essence, that drew the attention of the divine? It had always felt the pull of both darkness and light, its wings seemingly caught between two worlds, never fully grounded in either. The raven had delivered warnings, carried messages of salvation, and observed the devastation of the world. But now, in the stillness of the cosmic night, it wondered if its role was something more than just a messenger. Was it a symbol of the balance that all creation hinged upon? In the silence, the raven thought about the countless beings it had witnessed, those who had chosen the path of light, and those who had embraced the darkness. It had seen both the best and the worst of humanity, and at times it had wondered if there was even a difference between the two. Were the lines between good and evil truly so clear, or had it all become a matter of perspective? As it pondered these questions, the raven's heart grew heavy with doubt. It had always thought that its purpose was to guide, to help choose the right path. But what if its actions had only served to deepen the divisions, to make the choices even more difficult for those it had been sent to help? The raven's gaze turned inward, and for the first time, it truly saw itself not as a divine messenger or a creature of the sky, but as a being caught in a web of fate, shaped by forces beyond its comprehension. Was it simply a tool, a puppet in the grand design, or was it something more, a creature capable of its own choices, its own destiny? These questions swirled within it like a storm, and yet, the raven could not find the answers. It had never been granted the understanding it sought, only the task, only the flight. And so, the raven continued its journey, carrying its burden, knowing that the answers it sought might never come. Yet, still, it flew forever caught between worlds, forever questioning its place in the cosmos. The raven had witnessed countless souls rise and fall throughout the eons, each carrying the weight of its choices, each trapped in the unseen ebb and flow of fate. As it journeyed through the vast reaches of the universe, it came to realize a painful truth. Many souls had become lost, their paths veiled in shadow, never to find their way back to the light. There were whispers of them, lingering on the edges of creation, wandering in spaces between time, caught in an endless cycle of regret, unable to seek the redemption they desperately needed. The Raven had never fully understood the depth of these lost souls until now. It had always seen itself as a messenger, tasked with delivering words of guidance and warning. But the truth that unfurled before it was more complex. Redemption, it seemed, was not simply granted. It was earned, a price paid in the form of sacrifice, and many souls had failed to make that payment. Some had chosen the path of darkness so completely that they could no longer hear the whispers of light. Others had fallen through the cracks of time, caught in a web of their own making, unable to break free. The Raven's heart ached as it flew through the realms, guided by an unseen hand toward the souls trapped in limbo. It was here, between the living and the dead, that the true weight of its mission became clear. It was not just a bearer of messages, but a witness to the suffering of those who had lost their way. And it was burdened by the knowledge that there was little it could do to help them. The souls it encountered were not wicked, not inherently evil, they were simply lost. Their choices had led them astray. And now they wandered in the dark, crying out for redemption that seemed forever out of reach. The Raven could feel their pain, their longing to return to the light. And yet, it knew that redemption had its price. It was not a simple matter of forgiveness or a kind word whispered in the dark. The lost souls had to face the consequences of their actions, to confront the very darkness they had once embraced. This was the sacrifice they had to make. They had to give up the very things that had bound them to their suffering, to lay down their pride, their anger, their regrets, and finally surrender to the light. But for many, this surrender would never come. The Raven understood that now. It had seen the brokenness of creation, the consequences of free will, and the painful truth that redemption was not a guaranteed gift. It could only be earned. As it flew on, the Raven carried with it the burden of all those souls, their cries echoing in the silence of the cosmos, each a reminder of the cost of redemption. And though it could not save them all, the Raven knew that its role was still to be the witness, to carry their memory, and to continue on its path, ever searching for those who might yet find their way back to the light. The Raven had grown accustomed to the silence of the cosmic void, to the weight of its wings slicing through the endless expanse, carrying its messages to worlds both seen and unseen. But this silence was different. A presence had entered the air, so tangible, it pressed upon the very essence of the Raven's being. It was an angel, its wings unfurling with the sound of distant thunder, its radiance so overwhelming that the stars themselves dimmed in its presence. The Raven had heard of these beings, their glory and power, but never before had it stood face to face with one. The angel's gaze pierced through the layers of the world, seeing not just the Raven, but everything that had been and everything that would be. The Raven felt its heart beat in rhythm with the pulse of eternity. It knew, deep within, that the angel had come not just to deliver a message, but to unveil a truth that would shape the very foundation of its existence. "You are but a messenger," the angel's voice boomed, both gentle and fierce. "But in the coming days, your role will become more than that. You will stand at the crossroads of all that is and all that shall ever be. The end of this world is near, and your wings will carry not just the weight of messages, but the fate of the souls you have guided." The Raven did not speak, for it knew that words would only obscure the understanding that was unfolding before it. The angel's words were clear, though laced with sorrow. The world was in its final days, its balance tipping toward the inevitable chaos that had long been foretold. Yet in the heart of this chaos, the Raven would find its purpose, its ultimate test of faith. You have watched as the great forces of light and darkness have battled. But now, the angel continued, you will see the final chapter of this struggle. The lines between worlds will blur, and only those who truly understand the delicate balance of creation will survive the storm. You are a bridge, Raven, a symbol of both judgment and mercy. Your wings will carry those who are worthy, and yet you will also bear the weight of those who are lost. The raven felt a shiver pass through its feathers. It had always known that its task was greater than it could comprehend, but now it understood that its fate was intricately woven into the world's end. The angel spoke again, its voice low, yet filled with a prophecy that could not be ignored. The time will come when the skies will open, and all will be revealed. The raven will be the last to fly, the first to fall. But in its descent, it will carry the spark of renewal. From its ashes, a new world will rise, one where the lessons of the past will not be forgotten. The angel's words faded, leaving the raven standing in the silence once again. Its wings, once light with the knowledge of its task, now felt burdened with the weight of destiny. It had been chosen for more than it had ever known. The prophecy was clear. The end was near, and its role was far from finished. The raven soared high above the world, its wings slicing through the shifting winds with a restless energy it had not known before. Beneath it, the earth sprawled out, an intricate patchwork of land and sea, of life and death. Yet, despite the vastness of creation, something gnawed at the raven's spirit, a question it could not silence. Why? Why had it been chosen? What was the true meaning of its existence in the grand unfolding of the cosmos? It had been a messenger for eons, watching, delivering, bearing the weight of divine words. But as the world spiraled closer to its end, the raven found itself questioning its own purpose. The divine plans had been revealed, the prophecy set, but it could no longer deny the uncertainty that clouded its heart. It sought something more, something beyond duty and endless flight. Its first destination was a mountaintop, said to be a place where the earth touched the heavens, where the whispers of the universe could be heard by those who listened with an open heart. There, the raven encountered an old seer, a figure draped in the wisdom of centuries, its eyes reflecting the depth of 1,000 lifetimes. The raven perched nearby, waiting for the words it had so long sought. "Why do you seek meaning?" the seer asked, its voice like the wind, gentle yet unyielding. "I seek to understand why I exist," the raven replied, its voice carrying the weight of eons. "I have delivered many messages, watched as kingdoms rose and fell, seen life bloom and die. But I do not understand my role in this. I carry the words of others, but what of my own?" The seer smiled, a flicker of understanding passing through its eyes. "To seek meaning is to seek the truth of one's being. But meaning is not something given, Raven. It is something that must be found within, in the choices you make, the paths you walk. You are more than a bearer of messages. You are a witness, a keeper of the balance." The raven felt something stir deep within. The words of the seer echoed in its mind, offering a new perspective. It had always thought of itself as merely a servant, a messenger bound by duty. But perhaps there was more to its journey, more to its existence than it had ever realized. With a quiet nod, the raven took flight once more, its wings now carrying it toward other sacred places. Places where the veil between worlds thinned, and where the mysteries of creation could be glimpsed. It sought out the wise, the ones who had glimpsed the deeper truths of the universe. Each conversation left it with more questions, but also more clarity. The raven began to understand that its journey was not just about delivering messages, but about seeking the truths hidden within the very fabric of existence. In the silence that followed each encounter, the raven reflected. Its quest had just begun. The path to meaning was not an answer to be found, but a journey to be lived. And with each beat of its wings, the raven grew closer to understanding not just the world it had witnessed, but the purpose it was meant to fulfill within it. The raven perched high on a solitary branch, its keen eyes fixed on the world below. From its vantage point, it could see everything, the vast expanse of humanity, their struggles, their fleeting moments of joy, their depths of sorrow. It had observed them for eons. But now, it found itself reflecting more deeply than ever before. The complexities of their lives, their choices, and the weight of their consequences unfolded before it like an intricate tapestry, woven with threads of light and darkness. Humanity, in all its beauty and brokenness, was an enigma. The raven had delivered its messages, had carried the weight of divine knowledge, but now it saw beyond the task at hand. It saw the pain in the hearts of the downtrodden, the quiet battles fought in the corners of the world, the glimmer of hope in moments of despair. It saw the joy of creation, the laughter of children, the tender touch of a lover, the quiet peace found in a moment of stillness. But it also saw the cruelty that shadowed their paths, wars fought over pride, hatred sown without reason, lives lost in the wake of ambition. These were the burdens that humans carried, and the raven, silent in its observation, felt the weight of it all. In its silence, the raven began to understand the intricacy of divine judgment. It was not merely a matter of right and wrong, of black and white. It was far more complex, woven from countless threads of intention, circumstance, and consequence. Each soul that came before the divine, the raven knew, carried with it the echoes of its choices, both noble and flawed, and the raven, though it had never judged, felt an empathy it could not ignore, for in watching the suffering of humans, it also saw their resilience, their capacity for redemption, and the flickering light of hope that refused to be extinguished. The raven had always known its role, had always understood its duty as a messenger. But now, it realized that being a witness was just as crucial. To witness was to understand, and to understand was to bear witness not just to the failings of humanity, but also to the boundless capacity for love, sacrifice, and grace. It saw the angels weeping for the lost, the faithful rising again after every fall, and the quiet moments of tenderness that defined the human heart. As the raven continued its watch, it realized that its presence, though silent, was necessary. It was a reminder of the divine gaze upon creation, the presence of something greater, more patient, and more compassionate than humanity could ever fully understand. And in this silence, the raven knew that its role was not to intervene, but to observe, to hold space for the sacred unfolding of humanity's journey, even as it navigated the complexities of divine judgment. The raven sat alone in the shadow of an ancient oak, the weight of the world pressing on its wings. It had flown through countless skies, delivered endless messages, and witnessed the rise and fall of empires. Its purpose had always been clear, to carry the will of the divine to the hearts of those who needed it most. But now, as it stared into the vast, silent expanse, the raven found itself caught in a moment of profound doubt. The clarity it had once felt was slipping, and a question loomed over its being. Should it continue on its appointed path, or was there something more, something beyond its endless duty? For centuries, it had carried the weight of God's will, never questioning the righteousness of its task. It had witnessed the tears of those who had heard the divine message, and the smiles of those whose lives had been transformed by it. But now, as the world swirled with turmoil and humanity seemed ever more divided, the raven felt a stirring deep within its soul. It had longed for freedom, for the chance to live without the constant burden of serving as a herald. The endless cycle of carrying divine messages, of offering hope to the broken, had become a prison of sorts, one that had no end in sight. The raven, once so sure of its purpose, began to wonder if it was enough to simply serve, or if it, too, deserved a chance to choose. The raven thought of the humans it had encountered, their struggles, their triumphs, their failures. Some had embraced the divine message, rising above their limitations, while others had turned away, lost to their own darkness. What if the raven could choose for itself, free from the chains of its divine assignment? Could it abandon its role as messenger and seek something more for itself, a life of its own design, where it no longer had to carry the weight of God's truth, but could live in the freedom it had long dreamed of? Yet, as soon as the thought emerged, the raven felt a pang of guilt. It had seen the consequences of those who had refused the divine call, how their lives had unraveled, how the world around them had turned to dust. The raven knew too well the cost of rebellion, of turning away from the light. It had witnessed the fall of the Watchers, the eternal punishment that awaited those who sought to defy the divine plan. Could it, a humble servant of the divine, truly choose to walk away? Or was it destined, as it always had been, to stand at the crossroads of humanity and the divine, forever bound to its mission? With a heavy heart, the raven spread its wings and took flight once again, the weight of its decision pressing upon it. In the end, it knew the answer. The path of freedom was alluring, but it was not the one meant for it. For all the doubts it harbored, the raven understood that its role was not one of mere servitude. It was a bridge, a messenger, a link between the divine and the earthly. And though it longed for release, it could not abandon its purpose. It had made its choice. The earth trembled as the giants, once towering over the world with their immense strength and pride, now found themselves on the brink of annihilation. The very ground that had once bowed to their might now seemed to rise in defiance, as though nature itself was rejecting their presence. For centuries, the giants had walked the earth, their immense forms casting long shadows over humanity, their actions sowing destruction wherever they tread. Their rebellion had been foretold, their fall inevitable, and yet the raven, ever the messenger, could not help but feel a deep sorrow as the final chapter of their story unfolded before it. The raven had witnessed the giants rise, how they had once been noble in the eyes of the heavens, how they had been entrusted with the care of the earth and its inhabitants. But somewhere along the way, they had strayed. Their desire for power had led them to defy the divine order, and their corrupted hearts had caused the heavens to turn away. And now, as the time for their judgment came, the raven knew it was the one tasked with delivering the final message. It perched silently on a rock overlooking the giant's stronghold, watching as the great beings stirred restlessly, their once glorious forms now trembling with fear. They had sensed the end was near. But still, they refused to repent, clinging to their pride as though it could save them from the inevitable. The raven felt a pang of pity for them, a once great race, now fallen into ruin. It had been the giants' own choices that had led them here, yet their end was no less tragic. The raven spread its wings and took to the sky, its feathers gleaming in the dimming light of the day. It flew low over the giants, who looked up in confusion, their eyes full of defiance. They had heard the warnings before, but they had not heeded them. The raven had always been the bearer of truth, of knowledge, and yet it could not undo the damage that had already been done. The giants had chosen their path, and now it was time for them to face the consequences. As the raven soared, it called out to them not in anger, but in sorrow. It spoke the words that had been whispered to it by the divine, the final decree that would mark the end of the giant's reign. "Your time has come," the raven said, its voice carrying on the wind, reaching the ears of all who would listen. "You have walked the earth, and now it is time for you to return to the dust from which you came." The giants, once so proud, now looked to the sky with a mixture of regret and fear. The world had grown silent, as if holding its breath, waiting for the judgment that would seal their fate. With one last cry, The giants fell one by one, their mighty forms crumbling to the earth, their once unstoppable force reduced to nothing. The raven watched silently, its task complete. It had delivered the message. The era of the giants was over. As the raven soared above the ruins of the giants' kingdom, something within it stirred. For so long, it had been the messenger carrying divine messages from one realm to the next, witnessing the consequences of choices, and yet, never fully understanding the purpose of its own existence. Now, in the stillness that followed the downfall of the giants, a deep sense of clarity washed over the raven, as though a veil had been lifted from its eyes. It felt the weight of the ages shift, as though the very fabric of existence was revealing itself to it, piece by piece. The world below was quiet, but not still. Beneath the surface, in the hearts of humanity, and within the echoes of the natural world, the raven could sense a stirring, a shift. The lessons of the giants' fall, the knowledge of the Watchers, the floods that had come to cleanse the earth, they were all part of a greater tapestry, a cosmic design woven through the threads of time. The raven had always played its part, yet now it saw that it was more than just an instrument. It was a witness to something far greater, far more intricate than it had ever imagined. In that moment of revelation, the raven understood that its task was not simply to carry messages of judgment or to deliver divine decrees. It was a part of the cosmic balance itself, an embodiment of both mercy and wrath, light and shadow. The raven's role was not only to bear witness to the fall of empires and the rise of new eras, but to be a harbinger of change, a living reminder of the delicate equilibrium between all things. Its wings, once so weighty with purpose, now felt light. The divine truths it had carried for so long were not burdens to bear, but blessings to pass on. The raven realized that it had been chosen not for its strength, nor its wisdom, but for its ability to understand the deeper currents of existence, the way life and death, creation and destruction, joy and sorrow, all interwove to form the grand story of the universe. As it flew through the air, the raven felt an overwhelming sense of peace. It was no longer a solitary figure, lost in the vastness of divine purpose. It was connected to the heart of the universe itself, a small, eternal piece of the cosmic puzzle. The raven knew its journey was far from over, but it had found its place within the divine plan. It had come to understand that it was not merely an instrument of fate, but a guide, a keeper of truths that transcended time. The Great Awakening was not a singular event, but a gradual realization, one that resonated deep within the raven's being. And as it flew higher into the heavens, it knew with certainty that its role in the unfolding story of the world was far more profound than it had ever understood. It was both witness and participant in the eternal dance of existence, a keeper of cosmic secrets, and a bearer of hope for what was yet to come. The raven soared through the heavens, its wings cutting through the winds as it passed between the realms of light and shadow. It had seen so much vast stretches of time, the rise and fall of empires, the deep sorrows of humanity, and the unyielding flow of divine judgment. Yet, in this quiet moment, as it glided above the earth, something shifted within its being, a profound understanding sweeping through it. The veil that had once obscured its sight was lifted, revealing the grand design behind all that had transpired. For so long, the raven had carried the burden of divine messages, a herald of both grace and destruction, acting as the intermediary between the heavens and the world below. It had witnessed humanity's struggles, their victories, their failures, and had carried the weight of divine decisions, never fully grasping the greater purpose of its existence. But now, in this moment of clarity, the raven understood. It was not merely a messenger, it was a part of the divine plan itself. The plan, it realized, was far greater than the raven had ever imagined. Creation itself was a tapestry, threads of light and darkness woven together with a precision beyond comprehension. Every event, every life, every choice made had rippled through the fabric of existence, contributing to the ever-evolving cycle of life and death. The raven's role was not just to observe or to deliver, it was to ensure that the balance between these forces was maintained. It had been chosen to stand as a reminder that there could be no light without darkness, no creation without destruction, no joy without sorrow. The raven had always wondered why it had been chosen for this task. Why it, a humble creature of the earth, had been entrusted with such immense responsibility. But now, it understood. Its purpose was not born from the need for power or grandeur, but from a deeper calling, a calling to serve as the eternal witness to the unfolding story of creation. It was an instrument of divine truth, a reminder that every action, every choice, had its place in the greater scheme of things. The raven's existence was a testament to the cosmic order, its every flight, a thread connecting the heavens to the earth, weaving together the past, present, and future. The full scope of God's plan began to unfold before the raven, and with it, a profound peace settled within. It understood that everything, even the suffering it had witnessed, had purpose. Every fall was a prelude to a rise, every destruction a seed for creation. And in this cosmic cycle, the raven's role was simple yet crucial. It was not to change the course of events, but to be present to witness, to remind, and to guide. As the raven soared higher, it felt no burden, no weight. It was a part of something eternal, something beautiful in its complexity. It had found its place in the divine plan, and in that moment, it knew with certainty that its task was not just one of divine judgment, but one of sacred truth, carrying the heart of creation itself. The world had fallen silent as the moment of reckoning approached. The earth, once vibrant and full of life, had grown weary from centuries of chaos. The sky darkened with the weight of impending judgment, and the winds carried the whispers of the ages, as if the very air itself knew that the time had come for the final reckoning. It was in this quiet before the storm that the raven felt the weight of its task more deeply than ever before. It had been a messenger for eons, delivering words of hope and sorrow, love and wrath. But now, it stood at the precipice of a divine decision, a moment that would shape the fate of all things. The raven, though strong and resolute in its purpose, could not help but feel the magnitude of this final moment. It had seen the rise and fall of nations, the endless cycles of suffering and redemption. But this was different. This was the moment when all would be judged, when the scale would tip, and the weight of every soul's choice would be measured. As the raven took flight, the wings that had once carried it on countless journeys now seemed heavier, burdened by the weight of eternity itself. It was not just a messenger now, it was the embodiment of the final word, the last breath of divine will. The world below seemed to tremble in its presence, as if aware that the time of mercy was over and the time of judgment had arrived. It flew above the earth, the cries of humanity rising up in a cacophony of anguish, fear, and confusion. The raven did not falter, its gaze unwavering. It knew what it had to do. This was the culmination of all the choices made throughout history. The consequences of rebellion and redemption laid bare. It was not its place to question God's judgment. It was only the vessel through which that judgment would be delivered. And so, the raven carried the word of the Almighty, its flight a signal that the time of reckoning had come. In the hearts of those who still believed, there was a glimmer of hope that this final judgment might bring peace, that the chaos of the world might finally be set to rest. But for those who had strayed too far from the path, there was no turning back. The raven's call was the last reminder of a divine order, the final whisper of grace before the curtain fell. With each beat of its wings, the raven drew closer to the center of the world's reckoning. It felt the weight of the divine judgment, and in that weight it found its peace. It had completed its mission, its purpose fulfilled. The raven was not just a messenger of God's wrath, it was the bearer of truth, the silent witness to the unfolding of creation's final chapter. And in that moment, as it delivered the word, it knew that all things would be made whole again. Whether through salvation or destruction, the judgment was complete. The world had received its final reckoning. The raven felt the weight of eternity shift within its wings. For so long, it had been a bearer of messages, a silent witness to the rise and fall of kingdoms, a conduit between the divine and the mortal. But now, something had changed, something profound and irreversible. It could feel the air around it vibrate with a new energy, a cosmic pulse that resonated deep within its soul. The message it had carried for so long was no longer just words. It had become a part of it, woven into the very fibers of its being. As it soared higher into the heavens, the world below seemed to blur, fading into the mists of time. The earth, with all its struggles and triumphs, appeared distant, a mere shadow of what it once was. The raven's form began to shift, its feathers glowing with an ethereal light, as though the divine light it had once carried within its heart was now spilling out, changing it, reshaping it. Its wings, once black and bound to the earth, began to shimmer with colors that no mortal eye had ever seen, iridescent like the dawn breaking over the horizon. The transformation was slow, deliberate, as though the raven itself was not just shedding its physical form, but its very essence. It had been a servant, a messenger, but now it was becoming something more, something eternal. The divine spark that had always flickered within it grew brighter, burning away the last remnants of its earthly bonds. With each passing moment, it grew lighter, its body becoming translucent, ethereal, until it seemed as if the raven was no longer a bird at all, but a being of pure energy and spirit, suspended between the realms of the living and the divine. As the raven's physical form dissolved into the heavens, it could feel the ancient truths of the universe unfolding within it. It understood, now more than ever, the true nature of its existence. It had not been chosen merely to deliver messages. It had been created to carry the essence of divine will across time, to witness the unfolding of creation and destruction, to be the bridge between worlds. It was not just a messenger anymore, it was the spirit that would endure long after the world had passed. The eternal echo of the divine. The transformation was complete. No longer bound by flesh or feathers, the raven was now a being of light and truth, a force that would transcend time itself. It no longer needed to speak in the same way it once had, for it had become the message, woven into the very fabric of existence. It was now an eternal spirit, forever tied to the heart of creation. As it soared into the infinite, it felt no fear, no doubt, only a quiet peace, knowing that its journey had reached its final destination. It was free, yet bound forever to the divine purpose for which it had been created. The raven, now a being of pure light, felt the pull of the heavens once more. It had completed its earthly task, its mission fulfilled, its messages delivered, but the weight of its transformation lingered. It had been an agent of divine will, a creature of both the celestial and the earthly realms. Yet now, as it began its ascent, it realized that it was no longer the same being it had once been. The heavens above beckoned with a quiet, irresistible force, drawing it upward with a magnetic power that transcended time and space. It was not the same raven that had once soared through the skies, carrying the burden of divine truth. No, this was something new, something beyond form and flesh, a spirit intertwined with the essence of creation itself. The celestial realms stretched before it, infinite and eternal, yet now they seemed less distant, more familiar, as though the raven had always belonged to them, though it had only now come to understand this truth. The journey back was peaceful, without the urgency that had once marked its flights. It no longer carried a message for others, for the truth was now part of it. It was the message. It was the witness, the recorder of all that had transpired. With each beat of its wings, it could feel the entire scope of creation unfolding. The dance of light and darkness, the ebb and flow of cosmic forces, the divine plan, so vast and intricate, was woven into its very being. It had played its part, a small yet essential thread in the grand tapestry. As it ascended higher, the realms of heaven came into focus, radiant and beautiful. The light here was different, more profound, more perfect than anything it had experienced in its long existence. It was a realm where time held no dominion, where every moment was an eternal now, and every corner shimmered with divine presence. The raven felt no hesitation as it neared the gates of heaven, for it knew its place, knew that it was returning home. But as it crossed the threshold, something within it shifted. It was no longer the creature that had once walked the earth, bearing messages and witnessing mankind's trials. It had become something more, something eternal, an embodiment of divine knowledge and compassion. And yet, in this perfect place, it could not shake the feeling that it had left a part of itself behind. The journey had shaped it, had refined it. It was no longer just a servant of divine will, but a part of the divine story itself. The gates of heaven opened before it, and the raven entered, not as a messenger but as a participant in the grand symphony of creation. It had returned to the heart of all things, forever changed, yet finally at peace, knowing its purpose had been fulfilled. The divine light enveloped it, and for the first time in its long existence, it felt complete. It was home. The raven hovered in the stillness of the heavenly realms, its wings beating softly as the echoes of its mission faded into the vast expanse of time. Below, the earth had quieted, the remnants of divine judgment settling like dust over the land. The raven, now a silent witness to the unfolding of humanity's path, felt the absence that had once been filled by a steady presence by the guiding hand of God. God had withdrawn. For eons, God had been the pulse that shaped every moment, every breath, every turning of the world. The divine presence had been woven through the lives of all creation, and the raven had been but one instrument in a grand orchestra. But now, after the mission was complete, there was only an expanse of silence. The world was left to its own devices, its own choices, its own unraveling. The silence was heavy, laden with meaning. There was no divine voice to direct, no celestial whispers guiding the hands of mankind. It was as though the world stood on the precipice of its own fate, as the weight of the absence pressed upon the hearts of those who remained. The raven, once a servant to the divine will, now found itself adrift in a world that was both familiar and foreign. The absence of God was not just a physical withdrawal, it was a shift in the very essence of creation. The earth, with its fractured humanity, seemed quieter now. The once vibrant hum of divine purpose had dulled, replaced by the uncertain trembling movements of mankind. The raven watched from its celestial perch, understanding that this moment was inevitable, part of the great cycle of creation and dissolution, yet it could not help but mourn the loss. God's presence had been a constant, a guiding light that had shaped the world through its complexities and turmoil. Now, the world had to learn to stand on its own, to seek its own path, to grow and falter without the comfort of divine instruction. Humanity, in its freedom, would have to find its own way forward. The raven knew that the task was far from easy. Without the steady hand of God, humans were left to confront their own weaknesses, their own choices, and the very essence of what it meant to live in a world that could now go in any direction. There was power in this freedom, but also great peril. As the raven remained in the stillness, it understood that it had played its part. It had carried the message, it had delivered the truth, and now it had to let humanity shape its own destiny. The silence was profound, a divine pause that spoke more loudly than any voice. In this silence, everything was now possible, and nothing was certain. And with that, the raven, too, fell silent, waiting for humanity to decide what would come next. The Watchers had once stood in the presence of the divine, entrusted with a task that was beyond the reach of mortal beings. They were meant to observe, to guide, to protect the fragile world below, but their rebellion had been their undoing. They had crossed the boundary that separated heaven and earth, descending to the mortal realm to take what was never theirs, to interfere in the delicate order of creation. Their sin was not just the act itself, but the hubris behind it, an arrogance that saw the laws of heaven as obstacles to be broken. Now, their fate was sealed. The time for their judgment had come. The celestial realms, once filled with their brilliance, now fell silent in the face of their fall from grace. No longer were they the shining beings of light and purpose that had once walked among the stars. Now, they were condemned to a darkness from which there was no return. The heavens had turned their gaze away from them, and the earth, which they had corrupted with their presence, now turned cold and indifferent. The raven, though once a companion to the Watchers, knew that there was no mercy left for them. The scales of divine justice had tipped, and the weight of their transgression could not be overlooked. The once proud Watchers, who had defied the very order of the universe, were now bound, their power no longer their own. Their wings, which had once soared through the skies in their celestial glory, were now shackled, their flight forever clipped. Their voices, once filled with the wisdom of heaven, were silenced, swallowed by the infinite dark. The darkness that surrounded them was not merely a physical place. It was a reflection of the emptiness that had consumed their very souls. They were not just cast away from heaven. They were forgotten by the very creation they had once served. The world, which had once been their domain to observe and protect, now seemed alien to them. They had lost their place in the grand design, relegated to the void that stretched between worlds, where time had no meaning and space no purpose. There, in the void, they would remain for eternity. The punishment was not just a moment of suffering. It was an endless expanse of isolation, of ceaseless longing for something they could never reach again. Their judgment was not an end, but a perpetual fading away, a slow unraveling of their very essence, until there was nothing left but shadows of what they had once been. The raven watched from its place, a silent observer of their end. The Watchers' fall was inevitable, their actions forever etched into the fabric of creation. As they faded into darkness, the world moved on, the divine plan continuing without them. The raven had played its part, delivering the message of judgment. And now, like the Watchers, it too would wait. The end of the age had come, and with it, the conclusion of a chapter that had altered the very course of creation. The raven, once a solitary messenger of divine will, now found itself woven into the very fabric of human history. Its journey, marked by trials, faith, and the weight of unspoken truths, had not been in vain. Though its physical form had long faded, its message endured, echoing through the corridors of time. The lessons it had carried, the delicate balance between mercy and judgment, the understanding that even the divine could be tested by its own creation, had been passed down, subtly, quietly, like whispers on the wind. In the years that followed, the world shifted, empires rose and fell, civilizations crumbled into dust, only to give way to new cultures, new peoples, and new struggles. Yet, The raven's truth remained embedded in the collective memory of humanity. Its wings had not merely traversed the sky, they had brushed against the hearts of those who dared to listen, those who sought wisdom beyond what was visible to the eye. Its message was one of warning and hope, for it had seen both the devastation of creation's balance and the potential for redemption. The raven had seen humanity's greatest failures, yet it had also witnessed the smallest sparks of light that could bring about change. Through the ages, the story of the raven was told in different tongues, in various forms, adapted by those who sought to understand the cosmic struggle that still unfolded around them. In ancient scrolls, its tale appeared as parables, its lessons disguised in myths, yet unmistakable to those with eyes to see. The raven's legacy was not just a tale of divine retribution, it was a story of transformation. It had begun as a creature of shadow, a harbinger of divine wrath, but it had become something more. Its role as a messenger of divine truth had evolved, becoming a symbol of the eternal struggle between light and darkness. The raven had delivered its message, yes, but in doing so, it had imparted something deeper, the understanding that every being, whether divine or mortal, had the capacity for both creation and destruction. The true measure of existence was not in the power one wielded, but in the wisdom to know when and how to use it. In the hearts of those who listened, the raven's legacy lived on. It became a symbol of those who carry burdens in silence, of those who walk between worlds without ever revealing the depths of their knowledge. It spoke to those who understood that the journey itself was as important as the destination, that the lessons learned in the darkness could shape the light that followed. The raven, forever bound to the divine purpose it had fulfilled, had found its peace in the passage of time. And though the world may have forgotten the creature with the wings of shadow, the message it carried would never be lost. It would endure, whispered in the hearts of generations, as the world moved ever forward, seeking the delicate balance the raven had once witnessed in its flight. As the world emerged from the wreckage of its trials, the earth seemed to take a deep breath, exhaling the heavy sorrow of ages past. Humanity, scarred and broken, stood at the threshold of a new beginning. The skies, once darkened by chaos, now stretched wide, promising the light of a fresh dawn. It was a time of quiet rebuilding, of laying the first stones of what would be a long and arduous journey toward restoration. Though the shadows of the past still lingered, they no longer held dominion over the hearts of men. The raven's message had echoed through the ages, and its legacy had been passed down in whispers, in stories, and in the hearts of those who understood the cost of creation. The memory of divine judgment and mercy became a thread woven through the fabric of human consciousness. It was a reminder, ever present but never overbearing, that true redemption lay not in ignoring the darkness, but in embracing the light that followed. The seeds of hope were planted in the hearts of those willing to listen, to remember the lessons taught by the raven and its journey. In every small act of kindness, in every community that rose from the ashes, there was the subtle mark of the raven's influence. It had taught humanity that mercy and judgment were not separate forces, but two sides of the same coin necessary for growth, for balance. People began to rebuild not just the physical world, but their relationships with each other, recognizing that every action carried weight and every choice could lead them closer to or further from the divine harmony they had once known. The land began to heal, though slowly. Fields that had once been barren now sprouted with life. Trees, long stripped of their fruit, began to blossom again, their branches reaching toward the sky as if in silent acknowledgement of the past. Rivers that had been tainted by greed and destruction now flowed with purity, carving new paths through the earth. Yet it was not the physical restoration alone that marked the dawn of this new era. It was the quiet shift in the hearts of men, the understanding that their choices could shape the future. They began to see beyond themselves, to recognize the interconnectedness of all things. As the world turned toward healing, the raven's legacy acted as a guiding star, always present, yet never demanding. It reminded humanity that redemption was not given in a single moment, but earned through 1,000 small acts of goodness, of self-reflection, and of striving toward something greater than themselves. And so, the seeds of hope took root, not in grand gestures, but in the quiet moments where people chose to listen to the whispers of mercy that followed judgment. The world was beginning to rebuild itself, but it was a world forever changed, a world where the legacy of the raven would continue to guide those who sought the light. As the centuries passed, the story of the raven and its mission became the subject of contemplation and study. Theologians, philosophers, and scholars from all corners of the earth gathered to unravel the mysteries woven into the fabric of creation, and at the heart of their inquiries lay the enigmatic figure of the raven. It was not just a messenger, they argued, but a key that unlocked the very nature of divine purpose, a being caught between the realms of the mortal and the divine, tasked with bearing the weight of eternal knowledge. Its role, so simple yet so profound, intrigued those who sought to understand the nature of creation itself. In dusty libraries, by flickering candlelight, the works of the great thinkers filled pages with questions that had no easy answers. Was the raven chosen because of its form dark and silent, with wings that stretched wide as if to carry the burden of heaven? Or was it the soul of the raven, that deep connection to the divine, that made it the perfect bearer of such a heavy message? Some scholars, with great reverence, spoke of the raven as the eternal witness to both the beauty and the tragedy of creation, always present, yet always silent. Others suggested that its journey mirrored the human experience, a struggle between light and shadow, between divine will and the will of men. One theory that emerged was that the raven, in its flight and its purpose, symbolized the soul's path through the trials of existence. It was, in essence, a divine intermediary, sent not only to deliver messages but to bridge the divide between mankind's potential for both greatness and failure. The raven, perched high in the heavens, saw the turmoil and the peace in equal measure. It understood, perhaps better than any other being, that true redemption came not from mere obedience, but from the willingness to confront both the light and the darkness within. This, scholars argued, was the true lesson of the raven, to be both a servant and a free agent, carrying out its mission without the luxury of forgetting its own suffering and its own doubts. And yet, despite all the wisdom imparted by those who sought to explain the raven's role, its ultimate purpose remained as much a mystery as the act of creation itself. What was its true place in the divine plan? Was it ever truly free, or was it bound to an eternal cycle of service to a higher power? Some believed that the raven, in its flight across the skies, had come to embody the paradox of creation, a reflection of humanity's eternal struggle to reconcile its desires with its divine calling. The mystery of the raven, it seemed, would never be fully understood, and perhaps, in that, lay its greatest lesson, that creation, in all its grandeur and in its sorrow, is not meant to be fully known, but only to be experienced. The raven, with its eternal journey, served as both the question and the answer, forever flying, forever seeking, forever lost in the unfolding mystery of existence. In the quiet corners of the world, far from the noise of the bustling cities, there were those who sought truths buried deep beneath the surface of time. They were the seekers, those driven by an insatiable hunger for understanding. And as the centuries unfolded, some began to glimpse the hidden truths of the raven's mission. These revelations, however, came not easily but through years of careful study, reflection, and moments of sudden, divine insight. The raven, they began to realize, was more than just the messenger it appeared to be. Its wings, dark as the night sky, were not simply an emblem of shadow, but of the vast, unspoken knowledge it carried, knowledge that had been hidden for a reason. The raven's true task was not merely to deliver messages, but to guide humanity through its trials, to show them the way without offering answers too easily. This was the paradox of the raven, a being that could see the future yet remained silent, a creature bound to carry out its divine charge without ever fully revealing the depths of its own purpose. As the seekers delved deeper, they discovered the raven's connection to the very fabric of creation. It was said that the raven's flight through the heavens represented the divine will woven into the very elements of existence. Its path was not random. It followed a course set by forces much older than time itself. In this way, the raven was a conduit, a bridge between the unknowable realms of the divine and the tangible world below. The very air it breathed was charged with the weight of unseen truths, and each beat of its wings stirred the currents of fate. Those who truly sought to understand the raven's mission saw that it was a thread woven into the cosmic tapestry, neither above nor below, but part of the whole. The most profound revelation, however, came in the form of a question that echoed through the ages. Why was the raven chosen? Why had it, a creature so often dismissed as insignificant, been entrusted with such a monumental task? It was in the silence of the night, in the stillness that only the raven could understand, that the answer was revealed. The raven was chosen not because of its power, but because of its ability to be both part of creation and apart from it. It was a reminder to humanity that the divine does not choose only the mighty and the strong, but also those who walk between worlds, who carry knowledge without being consumed by it. In this quiet, the raven became a symbol not of omniscience, but of wisdom tempered by humility. The truth that the raven bore was not a burden of knowing all things, but of knowing what must be known at the right time. And in this, those who sought its secrets discovered the ultimate lesson. Sometimes the greatest truths are hidden, not to deceive, but to allow for growth. Only in time, and through the pursuit of knowledge, could the raven's message truly be understood. The raven, having witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations, the birth and death of countless lives, now found itself standing on the precipice of its final flight. Its wings, once filled with the heavy burden of divine purpose, now felt lighter, as if the weight of the world had been shared and understood. The journey it had begun in the heavens was nearing its end, and the message it had carried for so long was about to reach its final destination. As the raven took flight, there was no fanfare, no heralding of the great moment to come. It soared through skies that had borne witness to both the darkest and brightest moments of creation. The winds whispered of time's passing, of the wars fought and the peace that had been sought. The world below, still scarred from centuries of conflict, seemed to pause in reverence as the raven passed over mountains and oceans, forests and deserts. There was a quiet stillness in the air, as if even the earth itself was holding its breath. The raven's final flight was not one of destruction but of completion. It did not bear the message of impending judgment, nor the weight of divine retribution. Instead, it carried with it the peace that had been earned through struggle, the understanding that had come through suffering. For so long, it had been a harbinger of truth and consequences, but now it was an emissary of closure, a final acknowledgement that the time for reckoning had passed, and that humanity had learned, had changed, and had begun to understand the true nature of its existence. The world below began to heal, as it always does after the storm. The raven, now a being of light and shadow, traced the edges of the land where life was rebuilding itself, where hearts were mending and eyes were seeing in new ways. The pain of the past was still there, but it was no longer the dominant force. What remained was the promise of what could be, the hope that humanity might finally learn from its mistakes, that it could rise above the darkness that had once consumed it. And as the raven soared over the horizon, it knew that its task had been fulfilled. It had seen the world in all its beauty and its horror, and it had carried that knowledge into the hearts of those who had been willing to listen. The message had been received, and though the raven itself would no longer walk among the world it had once guided, its presence would linger in the winds, in the songs of birds, in the quiet moments of reflection. For even in its departure, the raven would leave behind the greatest gift it could offer, the peace that comes with understanding and the knowledge that the world, though scarred, had the potential to be remade. The final flight was not an end, but a beginning, a closing chapter in the grand story of creation. As the remnants of the old world slowly faded beneath the weight of time and the echoes of ancient struggles, a new world began to take form. It was a world born of fire and water, of destruction and renewal. The soil, once barren and torn, now teemed with life, as the earth breathed in new energy, eager to begin again. The skies, once darkened by the weight of unanswered questions, now opened to reveal a light that had been hidden for too long. The raven's message had not been in vain, for the seeds it had sown had taken root in the hearts of those who remained. Humanity, having weathered the trials and tribulations of its past, began to rise from the ashes. In the quiet moments of reflection, they realized that the true power of their existence lay not in domination, but in balance. The world they had inherited was fragile, its beauty fleeting, yet within that fragility was the very essence of what it meant to be alive. They had learned the hard lessons that the raven had carried, and now they sought to walk a different path, one shaped by compassion, humility, and wisdom. The mistakes of the past no longer defined them. Instead, they built upon them, creating a world that embraced both light and shadow, understanding the need for both to exist. The animals, too, thrived in this new world. The forests, which had once been destroyed by greed, now flourished once more. The rivers, once tainted by the wounds of humanity's excess, now ran clear, nourishing the land in ways that had been forgotten. Every blade of grass, every tree, every creature carried the memory of the raven's message, that life, in all its forms, was sacred. The birds, who once spread their wings under the weight of divine judgment, now took to the skies in joyous freedom, their songs a reminder of the beauty of the world that could be. And yet, even in this world of renewal, the raven's legacy remained. It was not a physical presence, but a whisper in the winds, a shadow in the corners of the world. Its teachings lived on, passed down through stories, through the quiet moments of introspection, through the songs of the birds that flew above the earth. The raven had been the guide, the harbinger of change, and though it had departed, its influence was eternal. The lessons it had imparted were woven into the very fabric of this new world, a world that would forever remember the price of its past and the grace of its future. The raven's task was done. The world had been renewed, not in perfection, but in the knowledge that it could be better. And as the first rays of dawn touched the earth, the raven knew that it had played its part in this great cycle. The world had begun again, and in that beginning, it carried the promise of hope and the possibility of redemption. The raven's voice, though no longer a physical presence, lingered in the world like the distant hum of a forgotten song. Its wings, once spread wide across the heavens, now flitted in the spaces between time, where the unseen and the seen collided. The world, reborn and full of promise, still carried the weight of its lessons. In the quiet moments, the voice of the raven could be heard, whispering through the winds, carried by the rustling leaves, and echoed in the songs of the birds that soared across the sky. Humanity, though scarred by its past, began to understand the delicate balance that the raven had long warned about. The world had been shaped by choices, both good and bad. But it was not too late to make new decisions. every tree planted, every river restored, every moment of kindness served as a tribute to the wisdom the raven had imparted. In the soft murmur of the earth's breath, there was a reminder, a call to remember the delicate threads that bound all things together. The raven's message was not a command, but a plea to never forget the balance between light and dark, creation and destruction, love and fear. The echoes of that message reverberated through the hearts of those who were willing to listen. To those who understood that true strength came not from domination, but from harmony. As the days passed, the world began to shift, not in great, sweeping changes, but in the quiet moments when a human would pause, a bird would sing, or a tree would grow taller, reaching towards the sky as a living testament to the lessons learned. In the distant corners of the world, where the shadows of old mistakes still lingered, the raven's voice whispered in the ears of the faithful and the fallen alike. It reminded them that the world could be rebuilt, but only if they were willing to walk the path of humility. The raven had been sent to teach them the importance of stewardship, not just of the land, but of each other. In every heart that chose mercy over wrath, in every action that embraced the sacredness of life, the raven's message endured. And yet, there was an undeniable truth that the raven's voice also carried with it. The balance could be tipped once more. The temptation to forget, to fall back into old habits, was always present. But in the quiet winds, in the whispers of the trees, in the rustling of the grass, the raven's call could always be heard, reminding humanity of its duty to protect the fragile harmony that had been restored. Though the raven was gone, its voice would never fade. It was the heartbeat of the world, forever intertwined with the earth it had helped save. In every dawn, in every dusk, the raven's message of balance and renewal would be carried on, echoing through the ages as a reminder that the world, this new world, was never truly theirs to destroy. It was, and always would be, a gift to cherish and protect. The raven perched on a solitary branch, watching the world below with a quiet wisdom that spanned the vastness of time. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, and the earth whispered in its quiet rhythms, unhurried and eternal. In this moment, the raven understood its mission. Once a burden, was now a part of the fabric of creation itself. The divine plan had unfolded, with every lesson learned, every trial faced, bringing the world to this point. The cycle had come full circle. Endings had always been intertwined with beginnings. Just as the raven had witnessed the world's birth, it now saw the steady pulse of life continuing, ever evolving. From the ashes of destruction, the seeds of a new world had taken root. Humanity, flawed and imperfect, now carried the weight of responsibility upon its shoulders. But with it, the hope that had been passed down from the heavens. The raven, though no longer a physical messenger, had left behind more than just words. It had left the very essence of divine understanding in the hearts of those who had chosen the path of balance. The raven's flight had been long, its wings worn from the endless journey across time and space. It had seen the rise and fall of civilizations, the birth of kingdoms and the destruction of empires, yet through it all, the raven had remained steadfast, ever vigilant. Now, it had found peace, a peace born not of complacency, but of knowing that its purpose had been fulfilled. The world it had helped shape was no longer fragile, for it had been forged in the crucible of divine lessons, and the raven had been there to witness each step of the way. There was no finality in this moment, no sense of completion that marked the end of the raven's journey. Instead, there was a deep understanding that all things are cyclical, that life and death, creation and destruction, were but parts of a greater dance that could never truly be undone. The raven had seen this truth unfold, had felt the weight of its own existence settle into the rhythm of the universe. It was not an outsider, but a part of the great expanse, woven into the very tapestry of life. And so, as the stars began to emerge in the twilight sky, the raven closed its eyes, knowing that the world would continue to turn, that its whispers would still be heard in the wind, its lessons passed on in every generation. The raven's task had been to guide, to witness, to teach, but now it could rest. For its presence would always linger in the pulse of the earth, in the hearts of those who remembered the importance of balance. The eternal circle had come full circle, and the raven, forever a part of it, knew that this was not an end, but a beginning that would carry on for all eternity.